Timeless Assassin by author Raj_Shah_7152. Chapter 1151-1175. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel. Get early access to video on Patreon. Planet Satoru, the next day, emergency demigod council meeting, Leonardo's POV. Ha 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 ha. Ribbit. Ribbit ribbit. Ha. Ha ha. Leonardo watched the three other demigods inside the meeting chamber with wide, horrified eyes, as he genuinely could not understand why any of them were laughing at all. Only moments earlier, Leo had calmly revealed that Caliph, the eternal sovereign himself, alongside Ruvasa, the mage god of the Ru clan, would likely launch an attack against the cult within the next 2 or 3 days. And yet, despite hearing the terrifying news, the three of them reacted as though they were discussing an upcoming festival instead of an incoming battle against literal gods. What the hell is wrong with these people? Did they have no sense of fear at all? Leonardo wondered internally, as he sat upright in complete silence while clutching both hands tightly against his knees beneath the table. Meanwhile, across from him, Leo casually leaned back in his chair while finishing the final details regarding their battle strategy. So if everything proceeds according to plan, and every one of us fulfills our assigned role properly, Leo concluded calmly, then Caliph dies outside planet Satoru, and the cult finally avenges the deaths of the previous cult masters properly after all these years. Leonardo's expression twitched after hearing those words, because even after listening to the entire plan from beginning to end, he still struggled to process the absurdity of what Leo was proposing. This was not some ordinary battlefield campaign. This was a fight against gods. Against monsters who had survived entire eras of history while watching civilizations rise and collapse beneath their feet countless times over. And somehow, even while discussing a plan to put an end to such individuals, the atmosphere inside the room still felt bizarrely relaxed. I mean, honestly, Cult Master, with all due respect. Ver spoke next, as he scratched lightly at the back of his neck while grinning casually. This plan actually feels less suicidal than the one we used against Yukiro. His eyes shifted briefly toward Dumpy afterward. Maybe it's because we've got this gigantic ugly bastard helping us now, but honestly, I feel significantly safer this time around. Ha 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 ha. Ver laughed, as, Ribbit. Dumpy puffed his chest proudly hearing that praise. I've wanted to smash these weak mongrel gods personally for a very long time myself, Dumpy declared loudly afterward, his massive golden eyes glowing with excitement. They strut around acting all superior just because they've captured a few planets during their lifetimes. But in truth, they're as weak as they come. A dangerous rumble escaped his throat afterward. And I know for a fact they're not invincible. His voice deepened further. Only Lord Father deserves to rule this universe unopposed. Everyone else can either kneel or get wiped out, Dumpy declared, as Leonardo slowly turned toward the gigantic frog afterward with an expression that genuinely questioned whether Dumpy was mentally sane. How can he casually call gods weak mongrels? Leonardo thought internally, as his scalp tingled listening to the absurd confidence in Dumpy's voice. Meanwhile, Leo simply chuckled softly. Haha, honestly though, this really will become a memorable battle. He muttered calmly. The cult has waited far too long for a shot to take its revenge against Caliph. His eyes narrowed faintly afterward. And since that old bastard is finally walking directly toward us himself, then the least we can do is make sure he never walks away again. Leonardo's mouth opened slightly hearing those words, as finally, he could not remain silent anymore. Excuse me, uncle. Leonardo muttered cautiously, as all three demigods slowly turned toward him at once. And instantly, the pressure inside the room became overwhelming. Leonardo swallowed nervously afterward. Are you all genuinely confident this plan will work? He asked carefully. His voice trembled slightly despite his best efforts. I mean, this is the eternal sovereign we're talking about. The room remained silent while he continued. Isn't he supposed to be the strongest existence in the universe? The architect behind the timeless assassin's downfall. The leader of the entire righteous alliance. And someone comparable to Lord Soren himself. He asked, as the moment he finished speaking. Ha 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 ha. Ribbit. Ribbit ribbit. Ha ha ha. The three demigods burst into laughter once again immediately afterward, while Leonardo sat there blinking blankly because he genuinely did not understand what was funny about anything he had just said. Good one, Leonardo. Ver laughed loudly while wiping at the corner of his eyes. That's the spirit, Leo added, as Leonardo stared at him in disbelief afterward. I'm not joking, he thought internally. The three of them are actually insane. And yet despite thinking that privately, Leonardo still remained outwardly quiet because this was his first time sitting amongst figures of this level. And the last thing he wanted was to appear cowardly before them. "Don't worry so much, nephew," Leo said eventually, as his expression softened slightly afterward. "Honestly, I'm currently more afraid of what Alia might do to me if you return home injured than I am of Caliph himself." Leonardo nearly choked hearing that response. "He may call himself the Eternal Sovereign," Leo continued calmly. "But titles don't automatically decide who is strongest." His fingers tapped lightly against the table afterward. "And besides, what exactly is the point in obsessing over how powerful he might be?" The atmosphere inside the chamber quieted slightly afterward. The battle between us and Caliph became inevitable the moment Soren died on the pit. Leo shrugged casually. "So now there are only two possible outcomes left. Either we are strong enough to kill him, or we are not." His gaze sharpened slightly afterward. "So rather than wasting time fearing worse possibilities, we might as well assume victory and fight accordingly." A grin spread slowly across Dumpy's massive face afterward. "Exactly," he declared proudly. "As long as Lord Father stands on your side, defeat is impossible." His golden eyes glowed faintly. "Nobody in this universe can surpass him." Leonardo stared at the three of them silently afterward. And somehow, despite how absurd their confidence sounded logically, a small part of him still felt reassured listening to them speak. Because while they sounded completely insane, none of them sounded afraid. "All right then," Leonardo muttered eventually, as he exhaled deeply before straightening his posture slightly. "If everyone else is prepared to fight, then I shall also do my best," he said, as he decided to let the result of the fight speak for itself. Meanwhile, on the Eternal Garden, Caliph's POV. Caliph stood quietly at the edge of the Eternal Garden cliffs, as the endless sea stretched far beyond the horizon beneath the fading evening sky while two silent tombstones rested behind him. One belonged to Soren, the other to Raymond. The warm sea breeze brushed gently against Caliph's face while he kept both eyes closed, as though silently listening to the crashing waves below while remaining completely motionless for several long moments. Then eventually, he opened his eyes again, as almost instantly afterward, a faint twitch of pain crossed his expression while his hand slowly rose toward his left eye. His fingers pressed lightly against the scar surrounding it, a scar that no longer healed no matter how much divine essence endlessly circulated through his body trying to repair the damage left behind. At first, the pain only appeared occasionally before gradually becoming a daily occurrence. However now, it had become constant, lingering beside him every waking moment of his existence. Even lightly touching the scar now made discomfort spread through his skull like poison, which was why merely thinking about it made Caliph let out a long exhausted sigh. "Sigh. I genuinely do not know what kind of willpower you possessed, brother," he muttered quietly toward Soren's grave while his gaze lowered slightly afterward. "To continue living while enduring injuries like these for centuries. If I were in your place, I honestly think I would have ended my own life much sooner. After all, what exactly is the point of existing, if all that remains of your existence is endless suffering?" Caliph asked softly, as faint exhaustion flickered across his eyes for only a brief moment before a portal suddenly opened behind him from the fourth dimension. Ruvasa stepped out calmly afterward, her long robes fluttering lightly in the evening air while her expression remained completely indifferent. "Try living with a thick scar carved across the back of your neck instead of one small wound across your eye," she muttered coldly while slowly approaching him. "Then perhaps you'll finally understand what real suffering actually feels like." Caliph glanced toward her briefly afterward, as Ruvasa's fingers instinctively brushed against the back of her neck while hatred flickered openly across her face. "Your brother truly left his mark on all of us," she continued quietly. "If anything, that bastard should have suffered for another few thousand years instead of dying gloriously like some tragic hero. But no matter. We'll punish his beloved cult in his place." A dangerous pressure leaked faintly from her body afterward while her eyes narrowed sharply. "And once that's done, I will personally make Morris pay for what he did to me." Venom practically dripped from her voice while speaking that name aloud, because unlike the others who merely disliked Morris, Ruvasa genuinely hated him on a deeply personal level. Step. Ruvasa slowly approached Caliph, her body covered in battle armor while layers of divine runes shimmered faintly across the dark metallic plating surrounding her figure. As Caliph turned toward her afterward before calmly snapping his fingers once. Snap. Instantly, divine essence surged around him. Swoop. Golden armor materialized piece by piece across his body afterward, as ancient runes illuminated faintly beneath the metallic plating surrounding the Eternal Sovereign. Clench. Unclench. Caliph slowly flexed his fingers before finally looking toward Ruvasa properly. "I assume you're ready for this battle." He asked calmly, as Ruvasa immediately scoffed in response. Please, she replied dismissively. You're asking me whether I'm prepared to slaughter a few demigods. A faint smirk appeared across her face afterward. I could do that immediately after waking up from my beauty sleep. Kalith nodded slightly hearing that response, as although he did not show it openly, her confidence reassured him somewhat internally. It is unfortunate that the others chose not to participate. Kalith muttered afterward while looking back toward the sea once more. Still, perhaps this is for the best. This battle will prove that we never needed the rest of the Great Clan Alliance to begin with, and that we alone are more than enough to eliminate enemies who deserve punishment. Ruvasa shook her head hearing that. They did not stay away because they fear the cult, she replied calmly. They stayed away because they fear Morris. Kalith's expression stiffened slightly afterward while Ruvasa continued speaking. If all the gods gathered together in one place, that bastard would absolutely exploit the opportunity somehow. He would either destroy several undefended worlds, lead Multheric directly toward the gathering, or create chaos some other way entirely. Her disgust deepened visibly afterward. But one thing is certain. He would absolutely interfere. That deranged bastard loves chaos more than anything else in existence. Kalith silently agreed with that assessment, because honestly, Morris's unpredictability remained one of the few things in existence that even he genuinely disliked dealing with. Yes, Kalith muttered eventually. The only real concern we have here are Morris and Multheric, because the Dragon God's alliance with the cult complicates matters significantly more than the cult itself. Ruvasa folded her arms quietly while listening as Kalith continued speaking with calm confidence visible across his face. However, I spent the last several months personally confirming Multherac's movements and observing his patterns carefully, and from everything I gathered, it does not appear that he currently stands ready to immediately intervene on the cult's behalf. Kalith narrowed his eyes slightly afterward. So even if Multheric eventually retaliates after the cult falls, that becomes a problem the Alliance can solve collectively later. But for now, I am certain that we are safe proceeding with this operation. Ruvasa nodded calmly hearing that conclusion, as a cold smile slowly spread across her face while divine essence gradually began leaking from her body. Good, she replied softly. Then what exactly are we waiting for? The skies above the eternal garden darkened faintly in response to her rising aura while the oceans below the cliffs churned violently beneath the pressure radiating from her body. Let's finish this once and for all. And finally rid this universe of the virus that has infected it for thousands of years. The cult of ascension. A dangerous killing intent surfaced within her gaze afterward. The timeless assassin's legacy ends today. The next day, a few hundred kilometers outside planet Satoru, Leo's POV. FSHHH. A fourth-dimensional portal suddenly ripped open a few hundred kilometers above planet Satoru's atmosphere, as violent spatial fluctuations spread outward through the void of space. Then from within the distortion, Kalith and Ruvasa stepped out together, both gods fully armored and radiating enough pressure to distort their surroundings, as almost instantly, Leo noticed their arrival. They're here, he muttered calmly toward the gathered demigods sitting around him inside the command chamber, as within the very next instant, his body disappeared. FWOOSH. A second fourth-dimensional tunnel opened briefly above planet Satoru, as Leo stepped out from it directly before Kalith and Ruvasa without wasting even a single second. Startle. His sudden appearance immediately startled Ruvasa, because unlike Kalith, who remained mostly expressionless, she genuinely did not expect Leo to react to their arrival so quickly before either of them had even properly released their divine aura. Squint. Her eyes narrowed sharply afterward, as she said. I haven't even fully released my aura yet, and you still sensed me. She began, as she spoke with visible surprise flickering across her face. Seems the rumors were true after all. The cult really did obtain the ingredients necessary to brew demigod potions. Ruvasa said, as she slowly looked Leo up and down. So General Sparrow was not the only one, you've also entered the demigod realm yourself, Leo Skyshard. She said with disgust, however, despite her words, Leo never even turned toward her once. His eyes remained locked entirely onto Kalith. Calm, cold, unmoving, as though Ruvasa herself did not even exist. For several moments, neither of the two men looked away from each other. Then eventually, Ruvasa snapped irritably. Hey, you, boy, I'm talking to you, she said, while snapping her fingers, and yet, Leo still ignored her completely. Refusing to turn his head even slightly, he continued to stare down Kalith, as by this point, Ruvasa reached the limit of her patience. It is rude to ignore a god, you know. Ruvasa muttered coldly, as she began to gather divine essence. That sort of behavior is what tends to get mortals like you killed. She warned, as the moment she finished speaking, her palms joined together. VWOOOM. Violent divine essence surged outward instantly. Violent cataclysm, she muttered, as a massive spell exploded outward from point-blank range directly toward Leo, as the surrounding void of space distorted violently beneath the sheer destructive force released. Boom! A massive explosion erupted around Leo's position immediately afterward, while shockwaves spread through the upper atmosphere of planet Satoru. Fizz! Smoke and divine essence flooded the surrounding void completely. And yet, the very moment the smoke dissipated, Leo still stood there entirely unharmed, with not even his clothes damaged, as he continued to stare into Kaleth's eyes without acknowledging Ruvasa, as though her attack itself had not even been worth noticing. What? Ruvasa muttered in disbelief, as by this point, Leonardo and Dumpy had also arrived from planet Satoru's surface, both appearing a short distance behind Leo while weapons materialized into their hands. Ruvasa's expression visibly shifted afterward. 2 more demigods, she muttered in genuine disbelief. How? She questioned, as even Kaleth himself raised an eyebrow slightly at that revelation, because although he expected Leo and Sparrow beforehand, Dumpy and Leonardo were unexpected variables entirely. Then suddenly, Dumpy growled loudly at Ruvasa. Bitch, shut your damn mouth already. His massive golden eyes glared toward Ruvasa with complete disdain while corrosive fumes leaked faintly from his body into the surrounding void. Don't you see Lord Father staring down that traitorous bastard? Dumpy pointed directly toward Kaleth afterward. Nobody here gives a damn about you. You're just an extra standing beside the main target, so know your role and keep your damn mouth shut. A dangerous grin spread across Dumpy's massive face afterward. Otherwise Lord Dumpy will gladly shut it for you himself. He threatened, as Ruvasa's left eye visibly twitched hearing that insult. Once, twice, thrice. As for several moments, she genuinely struggled to process what she had just heard. Because it had been thousands of years since anyone beneath the god realm dared speak to her this way. As ever since she had become a god, she had long grown accustomed to absolute reverence and fear from every living creature beneath her status. And yet somehow, this gigantic frog was casually calling her irrelevant. Meanwhile beside Dumpy, Leonardo quietly gulped. Gulp. Because unlike the 2 lunatics surrounding him, he was genuinely terrified standing before 2 actual gods while feeling their divine aura pressing down across the battlefield. And yet despite his fear, he still remained focused. Because inside his mind, he continuously repeated Leo's battle plan while trying not to panic. Don't focus on what they're saying, just focus on your role and all will be fine. Leonardo told himself, as he focused on controlling his breathing, until it was Kaleth who finally broke the silence again. I will offer you a favor, Leo Skyshard. Kaleth began, as his calm voice traveled across the void of space. If you tell me how the cult obtained the moonshine flower necessary for brewing demigod potions. His gaze shifted briefly toward planet Satoru below. Then I will allow you to choose a battlefield far away from this planet so our clash does not immediately affect your civilians. Ruvasa glanced toward him briefly afterward, though she remained silent. Of course, Kaleth continued calmly. This mercy would only be temporary. A faint pressure spread outward from his body afterward. Because once I kill you, I will exterminate every last cult citizen afterward regardless. His eyes narrowed slightly. But at the very least, you would succeed in extending their meaningless lives for a few moments longer. He offered, as finally, Leo smirked. All right, he replied calmly, while shaking his head. I'll play your little game, if you're actually man enough for it. He began, as he finally cast his gaze towards Ruvasa. But don't blame me afterward when the answer makes you look like a traitor in your ally's eyes. He warned, as the moment he said those words, Ruvasa instantly turned toward Kaleth with visible caution flickering across her face. Outside planet Satoru, Leo's POV. Kaleth frowned slightly hearing Leo's words, as although he understood there was hidden meaning behind them, he did not immediately understand the accusation itself. For several moments, the Eternal Sovereign simply stared toward Leo silently before eventually gesturing for him to continue speaking further. However, Leo merely smirked. Nope, Leo replied casually, as he shook his head while glancing briefly toward planet Satoru below. I'm not stupid enough to explain everything while standing this close to the planet. First, we move to a battlefield of my choosing. And only then do you get the answers you want. Leo proposed, as Kaleth's expression darkened slightly hearing that demand. However, after several moments of silence, he eventually nodded in agreement. As almost instantly afterward, the entire group relocated several thousand kilometers farther away from planet Satoru through the 4th dimension, as Leo continuously expanded the distance between them until he finally felt satisfied that Kaleth's attacks could no longer directly affect the planet below. As only then did Leo finally stop moving and start talking. The moonshine flowers were supplied to us by your son, Leo declared calmly, as his eyes remained locked onto Caliph while he spoke. Raymond himself handed them over to the cult's dragon, Aegon Vare, in exchange for learning several of the cult's secrets. The moment those words left Leo's mouth, Caliph's eyes visibly constricted slightly, however Leo merely continued speaking without pause. Unfortunately for him though, he never got the opportunity to reclaim the flowers afterward, because we killed him on the pit, Leo said, as a grin slowly spread across his face afterward. And personally speaking, I was the one who did it. He added, knowing full well that Caliph would lose his cool hearing those words. Huff, puff. Almost instantly, rage began to bubble beneath Caliph's calm exterior, as faint aura distortions spread through the surrounding void of space. Yet Leo showed no concern whatsoever. Now whether Raymond acted independently or under your orders remains unclear, Leo continued casually, as his grin widened further afterward. But regardless of intent, the reality remains the same. Your own son was the one who supplied the cult with the ingredients necessary to create demigods. Beside Caliph, Ruvasa quietly glanced toward him afterward, as although she understood immediately that this was not the right moment to question him publicly regarding Raymond, her mind had already begun calculating the value of this information. Because if Caliph truly wished to suppress this truth from spreading toward the remaining great clans, then naturally, compensation would be necessary. At minimum, I'll extort 1 or 2 moonshine flowers from him privately for keeping this matter quiet. Ruvasa thought internally, as the possibility of cultivating additional demigods for the Ru clan immediately improved her mood significantly. However, unlike her, Caliph still remained unsatisfied. But that still doesn't explain how the cult obtained water from planet Granada, Caliph muttered coldly afterward, as his eyes narrowed slightly. Without that ingredient, the potion itself should still have remained incomplete. Leo shrugged casually hearing that question. Explaining that was never a part of our original agreement, Leo replied calmly, as he spread his arms slightly afterward. However, if you truly wish to learn the answer, then how about you let me chop off one of your limbs first in exchange? If you let me do that, I'll give you the honest answer. So, how about it? Leo asked, as the moment those words left Leo's mouth, Caliph's expression immediately changed while his eyes sharpened violently. As almost instantly, the battle began. Boom. Without wasting another word, both Caliph and Ruvasa attacked Leo simultaneously while divine essence erupted outward across the battlefield like a storm powerful enough to distort the surrounding void. Ruvasa moved first. Coiled serpent, Ruvasa muttered coldly, as invisible chains of divine essence spread outward instantly while attempting to completely restrict Leo's movement and lock him into place. At the exact same moment, Caliph attacked as well. Crownfall, Caliph declared calmly, as a terrifying divine strike descended directly toward Leo's neck with enough force to cleave a planet in half effortlessly. And for one brief instant, it genuinely appeared as though Ruvasa's restraint had succeeded, while Caliph's strike was on track to remove Leo's head from his shoulder before the battle even properly began. However, at that very moment, flash, Leo suddenly vanished. What? Ruvasa's eyes widened instantly, as for the first time since becoming a god, she completely failed to track an opponent's movement. However, before she could even process what happened, Leo had already appeared directly behind her through instantaneous spatial movement, as shock immediately flooded across her face. Seconds walk, but he's still a demigod. How is that even possible? She wondered, as almost instinctively, she activated the strongest defensive spell in her arsenal to stay alive. Unbreakable defense. She muttered, however, to her absolute horror, the spell failed. *CRRSHHHH. For the very first time in her life, Ruvasa completely failed to conjure divine essence when she needed it most, as suddenly the flow of divine essence throughout her body became violently disrupted against her own will. And at that exact moment, far behind Leo, Dumpy grinned in the background. I told you, know your role, and shut your mouth. You weakling side character. Dumpy croaked softly, as his massive golden eyes glowed faintly while corrosive fumes endlessly leaked from his gigantic body. Then, flash. The boss's execution. Leo's origin dagger sliced cleanly through Ruvasa's neck in one horrifyingly smooth motion, as from start to finish, she never even understood what happened. Because the instant Dumpy disrupted the flow of her spell, Leo immediately switched the ordinary dagger in his hand with the origin dagger through spatial transfer before executing the strike itself. Everything happened too quickly, too perfectly, too suddenly. And before Ruvasa even realized her life had truly become endangered in this battle, she had already lost. Decapitation. The blade cut directly through the exact same wound Morris previously created long ago, as Leo forced the origin dagger deeper through the damaged flesh and completed what Morris originally failed to finish. Spin. Spurt. Her severed neck desperately attempted regenerating afterward while divine essence surged wildly toward the wound, however nothing happened because origin wounds simply did not heal. And only now, while her consciousness slowly faded into darkness, did true disbelief finally consume Ruvasa completely. This can't be real. She wondered weakly. Is this an illusion? A dream? She wondered, as even until the final moments of her existence, Ruvasa never truly understood how much danger she was actually standing in. Or how terrifying her opponent really was, as by the time realization finally arrived, it was already far too late. Somewhere in deep space, Kaleth's POV. Ruvasa's severed head spun endlessly through the void of space while divine essence burst wildly from the wound around her neck, as Kaleth watched the entire sequence unfold with disbelief visible across his face. The battle had barely lasted a few seconds, and yet within those few seconds, Ruvasa had already died before she could even properly understand what was happening. Initially, Kaleth genuinely expected her to block Leo's strike successfully despite being caught off guard, because regardless of circumstance, Ruvasa was still a god whose instincts and reactions stood at the peak of the universe. Which was why the true shock for Kaleth was not the strike itself, but the fact that her spell suddenly failed at the critical moment when she tried defending herself. Because throughout his countless years of existence, Kaleth had never once witnessed a god failing to conjure divine essence while casting a spell. And yet before he could even fully process that anomaly, his eyes landed upon the curved dagger resting within Leo's hand, as instantly, his entire expression stiffened. That blade. The moment Kaleth saw it clearly, a violent sense of danger immediately exploded inside his mind, because he recognized the weapon almost instantly. Soren's origin dagger, the Grudgekeeper. Kaleth muttered slowly, as for the first time since arriving above planet Satoru, genuine instability surfaced across his face. However, even that shock quickly became secondary compared to the realization that followed afterward. Because while replaying the battle inside his mind, Kaleth suddenly understood how Leo appeared behind Ruvasa moments earlier. Second's Walk. Leo had used Second's Walk. The very technique Kaleth himself spent thousands of years trying to comprehend, yet never truly managing to master despite all his talent, effort, and obsession toward understanding it completely. And now, just watching Leo execute that movement flawlessly while still merely standing at the demigod realm felt like a direct slap across Kaleth's face. Is there some hidden secret behind that move that I still don't understand? Did Father intentionally leave something behind exclusively for the next cult master? Some key insight that looks simple once understood, yet remains forever out of my reach. Kaleth wondered internally, as memories from his younger years suddenly resurfaced inside his mind one after another. Memories of the exact moment Soren first mastered that skill. The exact moment the balance between the two brothers shifted permanently for the first time in their lives, as from that day onward, Soren was no longer merely talented. He became untouchable, the clearly superior warrior. And because Kaleth himself never managed to learn that technique afterward despite all his efforts, a part of him never truly believed himself worthy of standing alone at the peak of the universe the same way his father and brother once did. As suddenly, the confidence Kaleth spent thousands of years building around himself cracked slightly beneath the surface once again. Because despite being called the Eternal Sovereign, despite ruling countless worlds, despite ascending into godhood itself, Kaleth still felt painfully aware that compared to true monsters like Soren and Leo, he fell short in the one thing he valued most. You, Kaleth muttered, as his pupils visibly constricted while staring toward Leo. How do you possess that blade? His voice lowered dangerously afterward. And where the hell did you learn Second's Walk? However, before Leo could even answer, Leonardo and Dumpy launched attacks toward Kaleth simultaneously from opposite directions. Skybreaker, Leonardo declared, as spatial pressure compressed violently around Kaleth from above while the surrounding void distorted beneath the force of the strike. Ribbit. Dumpy roared furiously afterward, as he unleashed a corrosive spitball from his gigantic body while poison fumes flooded the surrounding battlefield rapidly. Boom. Kaleth immediately raised his arm to block both attacks while retreating several kilometers backward through space, as by this point, he had already made his decision internally. Must retreat today, he thought, as although countless questions now raced through his mind simultaneously, Kaleth understood clearly that remaining here any longer without fully understanding Leo's abilities would be reckless. Especially after witnessing Ruvasa die instantly. And so, without wasting another second, Kaleth immediately tore open a fourth-dimensional portal before stepping directly into it, choosing to retreat first and sort through the situation later. However, the very moment Kaleth entered the fourth dimension, his expression changed completely. Because waiting for him there already was Ver. In just seeing him standing there shattered Calith's thoughts instantly, because chance encounters within the fourth dimension were practically impossible unless someone deliberately waited at a specific location beforehand. Which meant this entire situation had been planned from the very beginning. What? Calith muttered, as genuine surprise surfaced across his face. What are you doing here? He questioned, as before him stood Ver in his true form as the dragon of the cult instead of being disguised as General Sparrow, while the dragon merely looked into Calith's eyes and chuckled softly. You know, Ver began casually, as he slowly twirled his sword once beside his shoulder. When Leo told me that you would immediately try to run away like a coward the moment Ruvasa died, I honestly didn't believe him at first. A faint grin spread across his face afterward. After all, I spent quite a bit of time around you back in the Eternal Garden, and back then, you looked like a pretty fearless guy to me. His eyes narrowed slightly afterward. However, it seems Leo understands you much better than you understand yourself. Ver chuckled again afterward before continuing. He told me something interesting before the battle started. His sword lowered slightly afterward. He said, There, even a mouse behaves like a lion while hiding inside its own burrow. Quote. Calith's expression darkened slightly hearing those words. And honestly, Ver continued calmly, I guess he was completely right. Because the moment you dragged that mouse outside its hole, all it really knew how to do was run away. A mocking smile spread slowly across his face afterward. Unless of course it still had an army of mice standing behind it. Ver insulted, as Calith's eyes widened slightly afterward, as finally, he understood the full extent of Leo's trap. From the very beginning, this battlefield itself had been carefully selected to seal off his retreat path through the fourth dimension while allowing Ver to remain hidden beyond ordinary perception beforehand. As while initially, Leo himself did not even expect Calith and Ruvasa to willingly follow him this far away from planet Satoru. Because of the silly offer he made to Leo at the start, he had made his life that much easier. As if not for that, Leo's initial plan was to play defense and lure him to this spot before revealing his true strength. However, because the two of them cooperated so willingly, Leo never had to fake being weak, and could kill Ruvasa from the start, leading to this fight being the way it is now. Do you really think I'm scared of a bunch of demigods? Calith fired back, as he unleashed a dagger slash towards Ver. However, the demigod blocked it with ease and said, I don't think so, I know so. Because if not, why would you run away like a coward? A few seconds later, within the fourth dimension, Calith's POV. Almost instantly after Ver finished speaking, three more figures entered the fourth dimension from behind Calith, as Leo, Dumpy, and Leonardo arrived together while surrounding him from every direction possible. And strangely enough, despite the overwhelming killing intent radiating from his body that would make most demigods tremble in fear, three of the four demigods surrounding him carried faint smiles across their faces, as though they genuinely enjoyed cornering him like prey. What happened, EH? Leo asked casually, as he slowly twirled the origin dagger between his fingers while staring directly into Calith's eyes. Wasn't someone talking smack about destroying planet Satoru after killing us? What happened to all that bravado? Did it melt away already? Leo asked, as Dumpy immediately let out a loud snort afterward while corrosive fumes endlessly leaked from his gigantic body into the dimensional void around them. Of course it did, Lord Father, Dumpy croaked mockingly, as his massive golden eyes locked onto Calith with complete disdain. This weak mongrel bastard was only acting brave because he had that side chick standing beside him earlier. But the moment you killed her, he tucked his tail between his legs and started running away like the weakling he truly is underneath all that fake dignity. A dangerous growl rumbled from Dumpy's throat afterward while the surrounding space itself began sizzling faintly from his corrosive aura. And you, Dumpy continued, as his eyes narrowed sharply toward Calith. I heard you were the useless bastard who ordered his own son to kill the smoking man, weren't you? His voice deepened further afterward while murderous intent flooded outward from his gigantic body continuously. You probably don't even know who the hell I am, but I'll feel real damn satisfied knowing I helped kill you today. Dumpy finished, as despite the insults continuously thrown toward him, Calith completely ignored every single word calmly. Instead, his expression gradually settled into complete focus while a second dagger materialized within his free hand, as almost instantly afterward, his stance shifted into a perfectly balanced combat posture built purely for survival and killing. At that moment, all hesitation disappeared from his face entirely, because Calith finally understood one simple truth. His life genuinely stood at risk here. Do your worst, Calith muttered quietly, as the moment those words left his mouth, all four demigods attacked together exactly as planned. BOOOOM. Ver moved first, his body crossing the distance between them instantly, as he slashed his sword downward with terrifying momentum. Dragon Cleaver. Slash. The blade tore through dimensional space itself with enough force to split apart entire mountain ranges, however Kaleth calmly intercepted the strike with one dagger before redirecting its momentum sideways. Clang. The redirected force crashed directly into Leonardo, as the younger demigod barely managed to block before being blasted backward through the fourth dimension violently. Ah! He screamed, as Kaleth smiled, and yet, before Kaleth could even reset his footing properly, Dumpy already arrived behind him. Ribbit. Boom. The gigantic frog swung his massive blade downward with monstrous physical force, however although Kaleth blocked the strike successfully, steam immediately began sizzling from his armor and robes. Fisss. Just standing close to Dumpy caused the divine fabric surrounding Kaleth's body to begin corroding slowly beneath the frog's acidic presence. As Kaleth narrowed his eyes briefly before violently overpowering Dumpy through raw strength alone and launching him backward across the battlefield. Push. However at almost the exact same moment, Leo appeared directly before him. Clang GG. Both daggers collided instantly while sparks erupted endlessly across the fourth dimension, as Leo and Kaleth finally stared directly into each other's eyes from only inches away. One successor of the timeless assassin, against another. Tremble. Ripple. The surrounding dimensional layers trembled violently while both men continuously tested each other's strength, speed, instincts, and reaction timing through every exchange. Until eventually, it was Kaleth who forced Leo backward through sheer physical strength alone, as for the first time since the battle began, he established complete dominance. You children are clearly overestimating yourselves here, he muttered, as Leo merely smirked in response. Enhance. Leo muttered, as *VWOOOM. Mana and divine essence surged explosively through his body, while his strength multiplied sharply, however before he could press forward again, Kaleth already moved first. 720-degree destruction, the god declared, as SWWWWOOOSH. A horrifying dimensional slash erupted outward from Kaleth's body in every direction simultaneously, as dagger waves flooded the entirety of surrounding space itself. ********. All four demigods were struck almost instantly, with even Leo failing to evade fully, as thin cuts spread across his body before divine healing immediately closed them again. Not bad, Leo muttered, as genuine interest flickered across his eyes. Someday, I'll add that move to my collection, he complimented, as the battle resumed once more. As from that point onward, time itself slowly began losing meaning, as for hours the five figures continued clashing endlessly throughout the fourth dimension while devastating techniques repeatedly tore apart the battlefield around them. BOOOOM ****/ ribbit. Ver continuously pressured Kaleth from blind spots while using aggressive swordsmanship to create openings for Leo's assassination strikes, while Leonardo focused primarily on support and battlefield control through disruption techniques designed to limit Kaleth's movement paths. Meanwhile Dumpy acted like a complete anomaly on the battlefield. Every movement from his gigantic body radiated poison, corrosion, and divine disruption, as merely remaining close to him for prolonged periods gradually damaged Kaleth's armor and interfered with his spellcasting rhythm repeatedly. Yet despite facing four opponents simultaneously, Kaleth never once lost composure. Every opening they created was immediately closed. Every coordinated attack was either avoided or countered through terrifyingly refined combat fundamentals forged across countless years of real warfare. Ver's sword strikes were redirected away from vulnerable angles. Leonardo's traps to restrict his movement were dismantled almost instantly after formation. While even Leo's assassination attempts through spatial transfer gradually became less effective as Kaleth adapted to their rhythm over time. Hour after hour, the battle dragged onward relentlessly, as slowly, Leonardo began realizing something terrifying. Kaleth genuinely deserved his reputation as the Eternal Sovereign. Because despite his insecurities regarding Soren and Leo, the Eternal Sovereign still stood amongst the greatest warriors in existence, as his fundamentals, reactions, adaptability, and combat intelligence remained monstrously refined. There was no wasted movement in the way he fought, no panic in how he responded to pressure, and absolute precision behind every counterattack he launched. As the only thing Kaleth lacked was the overwhelming presence that made enemies despair before even crossing blades with him. While everything else about him was nearly perfect. He is a monster. No doubt about it. Uncle made it seem like he's a fraud and a joke. But that's not true at all. Maybe he's not as talented as Uncle. But there is no such thing as a weak god. One mistake here, and I could very well lose my life. Leonardo thought, as although during the briefing, Leo had dismissed Caliph as nothing much. Facing him now, Leonardo realized just how strong the man really was. Within the fourth dimension, Caliph's POV. The longer the battle dragged onward, the more unsettled Caliph became by the complete lack of fear shown by the cult demigods surrounding him. Because despite the twin origin daggers resting within his hands, the legendary weapons once wielded by the timeless assassin himself, none of the four opponents attacking him displayed the instinctive caution that most gods developed the moment those blades appeared on a battlefield. And that, more than anything else, disturbed him deeply. Why are they not afraid of receiving a permanent injury? Caliph wondered, as throughout the countless years of his existence, Caliph had witnessed even veteran gods subconsciously hesitate while facing origin weapons, because every god understood what those blades truly represented. And yet these four demigods continued attacking relentlessly as though the daggers in his hands were merely ordinary weapons. Is it just pure courage? Or is it something deeper? Caliph wondered, as while comparing himself against the cult warriors surrounding him, he slowly realized that unlike them, he instinctively flinched every single time Leo charged toward him with the origin dagger in hand. Not because he feared Leo himself, but because he feared the blade. And yet strangely enough, that same instinctive hesitation was completely absent from the younger demigods surrounding him. As, even while Caliph continuously flashed across the battlefield with the twin origin daggers passing only inches away from their bodies during countless exchanges, Ver and Leonardo still committed themselves fully into every attack without the slightest trace of fear or hesitation. While Dumpy was even worse. The gigantic frog practically fought like a complete lunatic. Several times already, Caliph's daggers narrowly missed vital regions on Dumpy's body by mere centimeters, and yet the corrosive beast showed absolutely no concern whatsoever, as instead of retreating or becoming cautious, he only attacked more aggressively with every passing minute. Ribbit. Boom. Dumpy's gigantic blade smashed downward once more while poison fumes endlessly flooded the surrounding dimensional layers, as Caliph blocked the strike before instantly twisting sideways to evade Leo's origin dagger appearing beside his throat moments later. Flash. Caliph blocked that strike too before Leonardo attacked from the side a split second later, followed by Dumpy charging once more without pause. As the cycle then repeated itself all over again, almost endlessly and relentlessly. Until eventually, while continuously deflecting attacks arriving from every direction around him, Caliph finally began understanding the true reason behind their fearlessness. That's right, he muttered to himself, these demigods have only ascended recently. They have not yet learned how precious immortality truly is. Caliph thought internally, as another clash erupted between himself and Leo. You cannot fear losing something you've never truly possessed. That's why they fight like demons. He realized, as the realization unsettled him far more than he expected. Because unlike him, these demigods still fought with the instincts of monarchs. They still approached battle with the mentality of mortals who could lose limbs, suffer wounds, and die permanently from almost any exchange throughout their entire lives. To them, battle had always carried danger. Which was precisely why origin weapons did not terrify them the same way they terrified older gods. Meanwhile Caliph himself instinctively recoiled every single time Leo approached him with the Grudgekeeper dagger, precisely because he now treasured this body like it was a pristine machine. And as a result, his heartbeat accelerated whenever the origin blade entered his vicinity. Because unlike these younger demigods, Caliph already understood exactly what permanent pain truly meant. Was this what I used to be like? Caliph suddenly wondered, as his daggers continuously exchanged blows against the force surrounding him. 2,500 years ago. Was this why I fought so fearlessly back then? The thought shook him more than he cared admitting. Because for the very first time in countless years, Caliph began questioning whether immortality itself had slowly dulled his edge as a warrior. After all, back then, before becoming a god, he too once fought without subconsciously calculating the consequences of every injury he suffered. And perhaps, that was precisely why he once felt stronger than he did now. Because unlike these demigods surrounding him, Caliph now possessed something terrifyingly valuable to lose. An endless future. An eternity. And perhaps because of that, he had unconsciously started fearing damage itself more than battle. Meanwhile, clang GG. Ver's sword suddenly collided against Caliph's dagger at a slightly awkward angle during one high-speed exchange, as the recoil from the strike forced Caliph's arm upward briefly from the unexpected force behind it. What? The god thought in shock, feeling horrified, as this was definitely not a normal occurrence. Had he been completely focused on the battle, he would never have made such a silly mistake, and yet, because he let his thoughts wander, he now stood exposed. As almost immediately, flash, Leo instantly appeared beneath Kaleth's exposed arm before driving the Grudgekeeper dagger directly across his torso in one horrifyingly precise slash. SHHHHK. Blood exploded outward immediately afterward while a deep cut spread diagonally across Kaleth's chest. Arg! Kaleth screamed in genuine pain, as his pupils visibly constricted while he looked toward the blood endlessly pouring from his own body. And for a brief moment, he froze. Because unlike ordinary wounds that immediately began healing beneath divine essence, this one was going to sting forever. You, Kaleth muttered shakily afterward while clutching the wound across his chest. Do you even understand what you've just done to me? His breathing gradually became unstable afterward. How am I supposed to live after this fight now? His voice trembled slightly while his eyes widened. Do you understand that this pain will follow me forever? He questioned, as Leo merely frowned while wiping blood from the Grudgekeeper dagger calmly. You're not making it out of this battle alive anyway, Leo replied bluntly, as though irritated by Kaleth's demeanor. So what exactly does it matter whether the pain lasts forever or not? He questioned, as the moment those words entered Kaleth's ears, his entire expression changed completely. Because suddenly, he realized Leo was right. There was no escaping this battle anymore. No retreat, no negotiation, and even if he somehow survived today, the wound carved across his chest would never heal for the rest of his existence, dooming him to a fate just like Soren's. No, Kaleth thought internally, as panic slowly began spreading throughout his mind. No no no. His breathing became rougher afterward while the wound across his chest continued burning endlessly. I refuse. His eyes darkened sharply. I refuse to spend eternity suffering like that. Images of Soren suddenly resurfaced inside his mind afterward. His brother endlessly enduring unbearable pain for centuries while still continuing forward stubbornly. Still fighting, still living. And for the very first time in his life, Kaleth realized something terrifying. He could never do the same. I refuse to become like that pathetic fool. Kaleth thought, however, despite trying to convince himself otherwise, deep down, he already understood the truth. Soren was stronger than him. Not because of talent or power, but because Soren possessed the will to endure suffering that Kaleth himself never had. As from that moment onward, Kaleth's mentality began changing rapidly. Because the calm and controlled warrior from earlier slowly disappeared, as desperation gradually started controlling his actions more and more. BOOOOM*****fis** crash. The battle instantly escalated afterward. Chains of attacks exploded endlessly across the fourth dimension while devastating techniques continuously collided against one another within fractions of seconds, as the battlefield itself gradually descended into pure chaos. Kaleth fought like a dying man now. Every strike became more aggressive, more reckless, more desperate. Meanwhile, the four demigods surrounding him pushed themselves harder than ever before, trying to contain him long enough for Leo to land another decisive strike. Dragon Cleaver. Slash. Ver's sword tore across dimensional space once more. Ribbit. BOOOOM. Dumpy's gigantic blade smashed downward immediately afterward while corrosive fumes spread across the battlefield endlessly. Leonardo simultaneously compressed spatial layers around Kaleth to restrict his movement paths while Leo continuously searched for another fatal opening. And although Ver and Dumpy barely managed to keep pace with the increasingly dangerous exchanges, Leonardo slowly began falling behind. Because compared to the others, his battle experience remained far too shallow. Then eventually, flash! Kaleth's dagger slipped through Leonardo's defense during one high-speed exchange before carving directly across his forearm. Ah! Leonardo screamed instantly afterward while burning pain spread violently throughout his body the moment the origin blade cut into his flesh. Blood spilled endlessly from the wound while Leonardo's face twisted in agony briefly. Yet despite the pain flooding his body, Leonardo still gritted his teeth and forced himself back into battle immediately afterward. Because he understood that he still had a role to play here. From the distance, Leo witnessed the injury happen clearly. And instantly, his own expression darkened slightly. Because unlike before, the battle had now crossed into irreversible territory. Kaleth had proven himself to be far stronger than Leo originally anticipated, and as a result, this fight had now reached a critical point where every participant in it had reached their limits, pushing it to a zone where errors like the one Leonardo just made became highly likely. No, these guys are the future of the cult. I can't let them pick up any more injuries. I need to end this fight. Now, Leo thought internally, as although dangerous, he decided to push through and end this fight, for once and for all. Within the fourth dimension, Leo's POV. For Leo, fighting Kaleth felt strangely similar to fighting another version of himself, because at their core, both of them belonged to the exact same breed of warrior. Both fought primarily using dual daggers. Both inherited the same foundational combat philosophy from the Cult of Ascension. And both relied far more heavily on speed, precision, timing, and lethal efficiency rather than brute strength or overwhelming aggression to win battles. Which was precisely why, the moment Leo decided this fight needed to end immediately, he also knew the exact approach he needed to take to have a maximum chance of success. As if the roles were reversed, this method was precisely how he would plot to kill himself. There, Leo muttered calmly, as he briefly glanced toward the dragon beside him while another clash erupted across the battlefield. I think it's time we use the same strategy we used against Yukiro. Leo said, as he talked without giving any explicit hints, so as to keep Kalith in the dark, while Ver still immediately understood what he meant. Oh, okay, Ver replied, as a grin slowly spread across his face. So it's finally that time, huh? Ver muttered, as excitement flickered visibly across his eyes, as he turned towards Dumpy. Oi, frog, Ver called out while tightening his grip around his sword. It's time to do your magic. His expression darkened afterward. It's time to avenge the smoking man properly. Ver ordered, as a cruel smile gradually spread across the gigantic frog's face as well. Ribbit, Dumpy croaked softly. And strangely enough, hearing that low croak somehow felt even more threatening than his usual screaming. Meanwhile beside them, Leonardo noticed the sudden change in atmosphere and understood that it was time for him to step back. Get away kid, now. Dumpy warned with urgency in his voice, as he cracked his neck while the concentration of poison fumes increased rapidly around his body. This fight is about to rise above your pay grade, he said, as Leonardo immediately disengaged without arguing, as although he hated feeling useless during such a critical moment, he also understood clearly that staying close right now would probably only hinder Leo's plan instead of helping. So he did exactly as he was told. What the hell are these kids planning now? Kalith wondered meanwhile, as just like Yukiro, he too became increasingly cautious of the unknown, and subconsciously slipped into a defensive stance, as he observed the developments around him carefully. Until, suddenly, he realized that he was being played. Oh no you don't. Kalith muttered sharply, as almost instantly, he slashed open a dimensional pathway using one of his origin daggers before immediately attempting to retreat outside the fourth dimension. However, the exact moment the portal opened, Ribbit, Dumpy suddenly slammed both fists against his own stomach repeatedly, and unleashed the move Ancient Swamp River. Thump asterisk thump asterisk thump. FWOOOOOOSH. A gigantic river of corrosive acidic sludge exploded outward from Dumpy's mouth violently while flooding directly toward Kalith's escape path, as the corrosive stream surged endlessly through the dimensional layers like a flooding ocean of poison powerful enough to melt entire landscapes instantly. As just coming across it, Kalith retreated instinctively. Flinch. Step back. In his mind, Kalith already understood that this attack could not hurt him. And yet, because he had learnt the move Sixth Sense just like Leo and Ver, the moment he came across danger, his body instinctively responded by using evasion, as although he could have suffered temporary damage and walked straight through that acid stream and survived, he did not. And as a result, he sealed his own fate. Because the moment he jumped backward to evade the acid river, Ver was already waiting. This is for capturing me, torturing me, and treating me like some cheap bait, you bastard. Ver roared furiously, as overwhelming divine essence erupted outward from his body. This, he muttered while raising his sword overhead, is the power of the cult's dragon, he declared, as he used the move, Dragon's Justice. Once more, ROOOOOOOAR. A gigantic wingless dragon formed entirely from sword intent erupted outward before accelerating directly toward Kalith at horrifying speed. Leaving Kalith with no choice but to block. Clang GG. Block. Using both daggers to block the attack, Kalith formed a cross and put his entire body behind the blades to stop the move, as violent shockwaves exploded endlessly throughout the fourth dimension. Yet despite successfully blocking the attack itself, Kalith's body was still forcibly dragged backward through dimensional space continuously, as Ver's dragon continued to roar and push, trying to blow apart Kalith's guard, as it dragged the god further and further away from the portal he had just opened, until it was no longer within sight. No, Kalith muttered while gritting his teeth. Until eventually, BOOOOM. The attack finally dissipated completely. You bastards. Kalith cursed furiously afterward, as almost instantly, he turned sideways before slashing open another spatial portal intending to escape once again. However, flash. Leo appeared before him next, as he tried to attack Kalith by taking off his neck, while Kalith blocked by raising his arm. Clang. The Origin Steel met Origin Steel, sparks flying through the fourth dimension, as Leo deliberately taunted Kalith by showing him an opening that he knew Kalith could not resist but attack. Just like Leo expected, Kalith went for the opening and tried to kill Leo by chopping his head off. Only for the attack to fail at the last second, as Leo used Second's Walk to evade it. Swoosh! Kalith's dagger sliced through nothing except empty space while his pupils visibly constricted in horror. Then suddenly, a gravity orb appeared directly before him. What? Kalith muttered in shock. However, before he could react properly, overwhelming gravitational force suddenly dragged his body violently toward the orb itself, as his footing destabilized instantly. Wobble. He wobbled despite trying his best not to, as the moment he entered the orb's pull range. Boom. The orb exploded. A horrifying gravitational explosion erupted outward while distorted dimensional force slammed directly into Kalith's body before violently throwing him off balance completely. As at that exact moment, flash, Leo appeared above him again. One normal dagger held openly in his left hand, while the origin dagger followed behind it in his right, as he twisted his hips to deliver a dual dagger strike. Raise. Block. Almost instinctively, despite being off balance, Kalith raised both his hands to block the attack, however at the very final instant, Leo vanished again. Swoosh. Second's Walk. As suddenly, he appeared behind Kalith instead. The Eternal Sovereign thought in disbelief, as in that moment, he finally understood everything. You used my own sixth sense against me. What a monstrous genius. To turn a pure survival move against its master. Kalith thought in appreciation, as at that moment, he finally accepted the fact that he was going to die, as his thoughts suddenly became strangely quiet. Slash. A split second later, the origin dagger slashed cleanly through his neck, as Leo finished linking the moves and completed the boss's execution. As for one brief instant after that, Kalith's consciousness still remained active while his severed head slowly drifted away through the fourth dimension. I'm dead. He muttered in shock, as strangely enough, the final thing that he saw was the distant portal he originally tried escaping through earlier, as a soft chuckle escaped his mouth. Ha ha ha, in the end. He muttered weakly. Was betraying father really worth it at all? He questioned, as oddly that was the only thought he had in his mind now. As in his last moments, he felt no hatred towards Leo, or the cult, or even Morris. Nor did he think about Helmuth, Mushen or the other gods he spent 2 millennia ruling the universe. As instead, the only thing remaining inside his mind during the final moments of his existence was one single thought. What would his life have become, if he simply never betrayed the cult at all? As with that final regret lingering silently inside his heart, the Eternal Sovereign finally died at the hand of the third cult master of the Cult of Ascension, bringing an end to his legacy and the story of the great betrayal. The fourth dimension, Leonardo's POV. Leonardo could barely believe his own eyes when he saw Kalith's head separate cleanly from his body and drift away through the endless dimensional void. Coming into this battle, he trusted Leo enough to believe that victory was possible somehow. However, deep inside himself, he still never truly expected his uncle to genuinely overpower and kill an actual god. Not like this at least, as the final sequence of attacks Leo unleashed moments earlier completely shattered Leonardo's understanding of combat itself. The timing, the precision, the way every single move connected together seamlessly like a perfectly planned execution, it felt completely unreal to him. Just how strong is Uncle? Leonardo wondered silently, as for several moments afterward, he completely forgot about the burning pain spreading across his forearm, or about Kalith's corpse, as all he could do was stare at Leo's back in awe. My uncle, he's the strongest in the universe. Leonardo thought, as the sight of Leo's shoulders standing quietly amidst the shattered dimensional battlefield somehow felt larger than life itself at this moment. As Leonardo could imagine the weight of the universe pressing down on that back and somehow it still remaining sturdy enough to not bow. As he could not help but feel safe, just standing behind it. Meanwhile beside him, Ver and Dumpy reacted in a completely different manner altogether. Ha 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 ha, you beautiful, beautiful ugly frog. Ver shouted loudly, as he immediately clutched his stomach while laughing uncontrollably. We actually did it. Ha 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 ha. The bastard's actually dead. He continued laughing wildly afterward while pointing toward Kalith's corpse drifting through dimensional space. Beside him, Dumpy also began chuckling deeply. Ribbit. Yes, you brain-dead dragon. Dumpy croaked, as a savage grin spread slowly across his gigantic face. The smoking man would have been proud seeing this. He muttered, before suddenly bursting into laughter himself. Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. As for several moments afterward, the gigantic frog and Ver simply stood there laughing like complete lunatics while the pressure surrounding the battlefield gradually settled. Meanwhile Leo himself remained significantly calmer compared to the other two. Without wasting time celebrating, he immediately approached Calith's corpse before beginning to strip everything valuable from the Eternal Sovereign's body one item at a time. The timeless assassin's origin daggers. Calith's divine armor. His storage ring. Every artifact. Every treasure. Every resource. Leo took everything without leaving behind even the slightest scrap of value. As although Calith himself was now dead, the possessions he carried still held terrifying worth throughout the universe. Leonardo watched the entire process silently while trying to steady his own breathing gradually. Because despite the victory, the battle itself still honestly felt surreal to him. They had just killed Calith, the Eternal Sovereign, the man who ruled the universe for over 2,000 years. And somehow, they had actually won. Alright, it's time to leave, Leo said eventually, as after stripping Calith's corpse completely bare, Leo finally bent down before grabbing the Eternal Sovereign's severed head by the hair, before tucking it between his arms like a carry bag. FSHHHHH. Opening a dimensional portal next, Leo walked out calmly, as the three demigods followed close behind. However, even as they walked out, the four of them understood very well that, with this fight, the dynamics of universal power had shifted forever. And that, the rise of the cult of Ascension, was impossible to stop now. Meanwhile, on planet Granada, Morris's POV. If there was one man monitoring the battle between the cult and Calith more closely than anyone else in the universe, it was Morris. Far away from planet Satoru, upon the storm-covered cliff of planet Granada, the deceiver silently observed the battlefield while rain endlessly poured around him without pause. And honestly, from the very beginning, he found the entire situation amusing beyond belief. Especially when he witnessed Leo instantly kill Ruvasa. Ha 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 ha. Morris chuckled softly, as excitement flickered visibly across his eyes while Ruvasa's severed head drifted lifelessly through space. What a terrifying little monster you've become, he muttered under his breath, as even he had not expected Leo to execute a god so cleanly that early into the battle. However, despite enjoying Ruvasa's death thoroughly, the moment Leo and the others chased Calith into the fourth dimension afterward, Morris's expression gradually changed. Because from that point onward, even he could no longer properly observe the battle itself. And suddenly, the uncertainty began. The waiting, the anticipation. As while standing amidst the endless rainstorms of Granada, Morris quietly contemplated every possible outcome that could emerge from the battle unfolding beyond his perception. In his mind, there were only three realistic possibilities. The first possibility was simple. Calith would kill all four cult demigods himself and prove once again why he remained one of the strongest warriors in the entire universe despite all his insecurities and flaws. The second possibility, which Morris personally believed to be the most likely outcome, was that Calith would somehow slither his way out of the battle alive like the cowardly snake he had always been. Because regardless of how dangerous the situation became, Calith always prioritized his own survival above everything else. Which was precisely why Morris hated him so deeply. Then there was the final possibility. The outcome Morris secretly desired most. The cult killing Calith. And honestly, just imagining that possibility made his heartbeat accelerate slightly with excitement. Because if Calith truly died today alongside Yukiro and Ruvasa, then the balance maintaining the entire universe would collapse completely afterward. The Righteous Alliance would immediately descend into chaos. The great clans would begin devouring each other endlessly. Old grudges would resurface. Wars would erupt across countless worlds simultaneously. And amidst all that chaos, the rise of the cult of Ascension and the dragons would become impossible for anyone remaining to stop. Which was exactly why Morris waited so patiently for the outcome. Even now, while standing calmly beneath the stormy skies of Granada, he found himself strangely tense. Almost excited, like a child waiting for a gift. Then finally, FSHHHHH. A fourth-dimensional portal slowly opened above planet Satoru once more. Morris immediately narrowed his eyes toward it. And the moment Leo stepped out while carrying Calith's severed head tucked beneath his arm, Morris completely froze for one brief second. Then suddenly, ha 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 ha, the deceiver burst into uncontrollable laughter. Loud, mad, almost hysterical, as he clutched his own face while rain poured endlessly across his body. They actually did it, Morris muttered between laughs, as genuine excitement practically radiated from his entire being now. That insane little cult master actually killed Calith. He whispered, while somewhere deep inside himself, he already understood exactly what this moment meant for the universe moving forward. Chaos. Absolute chaos. The old order was finally dead. And the coming decades would become more entertaining than anything Morris had witnessed in the last 2,000 years combined. Ha 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 ha. How wonderful. Morris muttered, as his grin stretched wider and wider beneath the storm. The universe is finally becoming interesting again. And this time, it won't be the universal government ruling it. This time, when the dust settles, there will be only one puppet master of this universe. And that will be me. A few moments later, planet Satoru. Where the job of the cult warriors ended, was where the job of the shadows left behind by Chaosbringer truly began. Because the very moment Leo returned to planet Satoru carrying Calith's severed head in his hand, while there, once again disguised as General Sparrow, carried Ruvasa's corpse over his shoulder, the celestial order that had ruled the universe for the last 2,000 years changed forever. Across the rainbow stream, countless sleeper agents, spies, hackers, broadcasters, informants, smugglers, and underground sympathizers activated simultaneously, as though they had been waiting for this exact moment their entire lives. As within minutes, hidden broadcasts began flooding GalaxyNet, while within hours, every major information channel throughout the universe had been hijacked repeatedly by the same horrifying image. Cult Master Leo standing atop planet Satoru's command tower beneath the crimson sky, holding Calith's severed head calmly in one hand, and the cult's flag in another, while he looked down on the citizens of the universe with his cold gray eyes. And once that image settled into the minds of trillions watching, the message finally began. To the warriors and citizens of the cult watching this broadcast, Leo began calmly, as his voice echoed across countless planets through hacked frequencies and emergency transmissions. I only have one thing to say. For a few moments, he simply stood there while Calith's severed head remained visible in his grasp, letting the universe fully absorb the sight before he continued. Our time has finally come. Those simple words alone sent chills throughout countless worlds. The betrayer, Leo continued coldly, the eternal sovereign responsible for most of the suffering our cult endured during the last 2,500 years, is finally dead. His voice carried no excitement or arrogance, only a cold certainty that made the declaration feel heavier than any scream. Punished for his crimes exactly as he deserved. The camera slowly shifted toward Ruvasa's corpse lying nearby, her lifeless body displayed clearly enough for there to be no mistake regarding her fate. And this, Leo muttered quietly, is only the beginning. Across the universe, silence spread, because even now, despite witnessing Calith's severed head directly on screen, countless people still struggled to accept the reality unfolding before them. A few years ago, I promised all of you that before the end of this century, the cult of Ascension would control over half the rainbow stream. Leo continued, as absolute confidence radiated from every word leaving his mouth. Today, I make that promise once again. His gaze slowly lifted toward the skies above planet Satoru. However, this time, we will complete that dream within 50 years. The declaration shook civilizations instantly, because unlike before, these words no longer sounded like fantasy, ambition, or empty propaganda designed to rally believers. Not after Calith's death. Not after Ruvasa's corpse. Not after the universe watched two gods disappear within a single day. Then Leo slowly looked directly toward the camera itself. And to any remaining enemy gods watching this broadcast. He muttered calmly, Ruvasa and Calith could not defeat us together. A faint smile spread across his face. So if any of you still believe you can succeed where they failed, then I suggest that you gather together. Show up for a fight. And die. The atmosphere surrounding the broadcast became suffocatingly heavy hearing those words. Because from this day onward, the cult bows to nobody anymore. There will be no negotiations, no surrender, and no compromise. His eyes darkened sharply while divine pressure slowly spread around the command tower itself. The cult will take whatever it desires. A brief silence followed. And what we desire is the entire universe. The declaration spread across GalaxyNet like wildfire. Then finally, Leo addressed the ordinary citizens living beneath the Righteous Alliance itself. And to the citizens of the Righteous Alliance, he continued calmly. To the people who mocked us, feared us, tried suppressing us, or prayed endlessly for our downfall. His expression remained completely steady. There is still time to repent. His voice lowered slightly. When cult warriors arrive upon your worlds, welcome them as liberators instead of enemies. Because the old order ruling this universe is already collapsing beneath its own weakness. And anyone who continues clinging to it will collapse together with it. A dangerous stillness settled across the broadcast. This is your final warning. Either you lot will surrender peacefully and live under our rule, or you shall resist, and perish. That is all. The transmission ended there. However, while the broadcast itself stopped, the chaos it created only continued growing larger by the second. Because Chaosbringer's shadow network immediately circulated the footage throughout every major system within the rainbow stream, making sure no local government, clan, sect, or civilian world could bury the truth. Public squares replayed the footage repeatedly, burner accounts flooded GalaxyNet with clips and reactions, and entire planetary communication systems were hijacked for several minutes at a time. No matter how desperately local governments attempted suppressing the footage, fresh copies continued appearing everywhere, as though the message itself had become a plague spreading beyond anyone's ability to contain. Within less than a single day, the news of Kaleth's death reached every major civilization throughout the universe. And naturally, the first reaction most ordinary citizens had was complete disbelief. Many dismissed it as fabricated cult propaganda, while others insisted Kaleth was merely hiding himself intentionally to lure enemies into complacency. Some claimed the footage had been manipulated through illusion techniques or advanced editing, because to them, accepting that the Eternal Sovereign had truly fallen was far harder than believing any lie. However, reality began settling in slowly. The Ru clan descended into chaos almost immediately, as Ruvasa's absence meant that the Ru clan at least understood the authenticity behind the cult's claims. While Kaleth not coming out publicly to deny the allegations only made the commoners panic even more. As despite the countless attempts made by the great clans to contact them, neither Kaleth nor Ruvasa ever responded, as the growing silence surrounding both gods slowly forced the universe to accept the horrifying truth. That the age of the cult had truly begun. Is this really the end? Some ordinary citizens questioned fearfully while riots gradually spread throughout several Righteous Alliance worlds. Is the evil cult actually going to win? Some questioned, while others immediately began preparing escape plans toward neutral planets and isolated non-mana worlds far away from the coming conflict. Meanwhile, more pragmatic individuals accepted the changing tide faster than others, quietly positioning themselves for survival beneath the new order before it formally arrived at their doorstep. Because whether they liked it or not, the balance ruling the universe had already shifted permanently. And everyone understood the same terrifying reality now, which was that the cult and Leo Skyshard were now unstoppable. Meanwhile, inside an emergency virtual meeting, while the rest of the universe descended into fear and uncertainty, the three surviving great clan gods gathered inside a secured virtual chamber to discuss the fallout of Kaleth and Ruvasa's deaths. For several long moments, nobody spoke. Because despite witnessing the broadcast personally, their minds still struggled to process the reality before them. It was not merely the fact that the cult managed to kill two gods simultaneously that horrified them. It was how easily Leo killed Ruvasa. That single horrifying sequence replayed endlessly inside their minds, as none of them could forget the speed of his movement, the precision of his attack, or the complete lack of resistance Ruvasa showed before losing her head. As the way she had died was completely unlike a god, and more like a helpless mortal. And that detail terrified them more than almost anything else. It's like watching the timeless assassin slay the beast gods all over again. How is he so strong when he's only a demigod? Mu Shen questioned, as watching Leo fight reminded him of the timeless assassin. However, while Leo's fighting style shocked him, what truly shook him to his core was the origin weapon resting in Leo's hand during the broadcast. Because Leo was holding the Grudgekeeper dagger. While Kaleth dying meant that he now also had access to the timeless assassin's old blades, meaning that he now had multiple origin metal weapons in his possession. As that realization alone changed the nature of every future battle they could possibly fight against him. What exactly do we even do now? Mu Shen finally muttered quietly, as tension filled his expression while his fingers tightened against the armrest of his virtual throne. Do we actually fight him? Luhan turned toward him with disbelief written plainly across his face. Fight him? He questioned sharply, as though Mu Shen had just suggested they willingly jump into a star. Have you completely lost your mind? His expression darkened while the image of Ruvasa's death flashed through his thoughts once more. You saw what he did to Ruvasa. That was not a normal exchange between equal fighters, Mu Shen. That was an execution. Luhan leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying fear that he did not bother hiding anymore. If you want to challenge that monster yourself, then go ahead, but do not expect me to throw my life away alongside yours just because pride demands it. Mu Shen clenched his jaw hearing that response, as humiliation and fear warred across his face. So what do you suggest we do? Mu Shen asked coldly. Sit inside our palaces and wait until his armies arrive at our gates one by one. He questioned, as Dutrask, who had been silent until that point, finally opened his mouth with visible unease. He is right about one thing, Dutrask said slowly, as both gods turned toward him. We cannot simply pretend this problem will disappear if we ignore it long enough. His fingers tapped restlessly against the armrest. You both heard what Leo said during the broadcast. He has no intention of stopping anymore. Dutrask's voice grew heavier with every word. Kaleth and Ruvasa are dead, Yukiro is missing and almost certainly gone, while the cult now possesses multiple demigods, origin weapons, and a leader capable of killing gods directly. He looked between Mu Shen and Lu Han with a grave expression. It doesn't matter whether we remain united or divided anymore, because the three of us are sure as hell not going to be able to slow down that monster. Which means, we don't have much options left. Dutrask said, as Lu Han's eyes narrowed in response. So what are you suggesting? That we disband and go our separate ways? Do you think that's smart considering the fact that he will only grow stronger on his road to becoming a god? Lu Han asked, as Dutrask shrugged his shoulders in response. I'm with Lu Han here. I think banding together and slowly resisting the cult expansion might be our only option here. Because, I can't imagine standing up to him individually. Mu Shen added, as Lu Han let out a cold laugh. What can we even do against him individually? He repeated. He killed Kalith as a demigod. What do you think happens if he becomes a god? That single question silenced the chamber completely. Because all three of them understood the implication immediately. If Leo Skyshard was already capable of killing gods before ascending fully, then once he crossed that final threshold, the remaining great clan gods might not even qualify as opponents anymore. Dutrask lowered his gaze slightly. We need another path, he said quietly. A direct battle may no longer be something we can win. Mu Shen looked toward him sharply. What path? He demanded. Morris, Multheric, some ancient hidden force we have ignored for thousands of years. Tell me, Dutrask, who exactly do you plan to ask for help when the entire universe just watched our strongest pillar fall? Dutrask did not answer immediately. Because there was no easy answer anymore. For thousands of years, the great clan gods had stood at the peak of the universe believing that time itself favored them. They had survived wars, betrayals, rebellions, prophecies, and countless generations of enemies rising only to die beneath their rule. But now, for the first time since ascending into godhood, the three of them felt the ground beneath their feet collapsing. The universe they ruled was no longer stable. The fear they inspired was fading. And somewhere beyond the safety of their virtual chamber, Leo Skyshard had just declared war on everything they owned. As for the first time in thousands of years, the remaining great clan gods genuinely felt helpless. As the only choice they could see was to surrender and become vassals. Or perish. One day later, the Eternal Garden, Leo's POV. Eventually, once the chaos surrounding Kalith's death settled, Leo finally left planet Satoru and traveled toward the Eternal Garden alone, as there was still one final matter that he personally needed to settle, which was claiming the ownership of the Eternal Garden itself, and more importantly, the moonshine flowers growing within it. As although the cult currently possessed enough granada water and pit soil to create several additional demigod potions already, the one ingredient they still severely lacked was the moonshine flower. Which was precisely why Leo decided to secure the Eternal Garden permanently before any surviving great clan attempted reclaiming it for themselves. FSHHHH. A fourth-dimensional tunnel opened silently above the Eternal Garden's skies, as Leo stepped through it calmly before slowly descending toward the floating divine land beneath him. The moment his feet touched the soft grass below, Leo immediately understood why Kalith chose this place as his personal domain for thousands of years. Because the Eternal Garden was breathtakingly beautiful. Silver trees stretched endlessly across the landscape while golden leaves drifted slowly through the warm breeze like glowing fragments of sunlight, while rivers of perfectly clear water flowed quietly across fields overflowing with exotic flowers and spiritual herbs unlike anything Leo had ever seen before. The air itself felt alive, while even the light shining down upon the garden carried an unnatural warmth that made the entire world resemble some divine realm existing outside ordinary reality. This place, Leo muttered softly while slowly looking around himself, is probably as close to heaven as one can get within this universe. And strangely enough, despite everything Kalith had done throughout his life, Leo could not deny the fact that the man did indeed possess impeccable taste. Because even Leo himself felt his heartbeat slow slightly while standing there, as the atmosphere surrounding the Eternal Garden naturally soothed the mind and calmed the soul. For several long moments, Leo simply walked quietly through the garden while observing the scenery around him slowly. Small glowing creatures drifted peacefully between the trees. Silver butterflies fluttered above flower fields radiating spiritual essence, while gentle waves crashed endlessly against distant cliffs, carrying with them the scent of fresh grass and flowers. And Leo enjoyed all of it, until eventually, his thoughts led him towards Amanda. Because somehow, while standing within the Eternal Garden, he could almost imagine her living here peacefully beside him. He could imagine quiet mornings spent walking together beneath the golden trees. Lazy afternoons sitting together near the cliffs overlooking the ocean. Caleb and Myron laughing somewhere nearby while sunlight filtered softly through silver branches overhead. As for the first time in a very long while, Leo allowed himself to imagine something beyond war. Something beyond survival. A real future that was as close to happily ever after as he could get. Step by step, Leo continued walking deeper into the garden while quietly soaking in the enormity of everything that had happened recently. Because honestly, if someone told him only a few years ago that he would one day stand here as the new master of the Eternal Garden, he would have laughed directly in their face. And yet somehow, here he was. The third cult master. The man who killed the Eternal Sovereign. The current owner of the most sacred territory within the Rainbow Stream. As the thought itself still felt slightly unreal. Eventually though, Leo reached the cliffside overlooking the endless ocean, as there, resting quietly, stood two tombstones. One belonging to Soren, the other belonging to Raymond, as just looking at the previous cult master's name, Leo felt strangely emotional today. Do not worry, old man. Leo muttered softly while placing one hand against Soren's tombstone. The future of the cult is in good hands now. His voice remained calm, however despite that calmness, Leo still needed to pause briefly afterward to steady himself emotionally. Because although he was not usually an emotional man by nature, standing before Soren's grave now as a cult master himself finally made him understand just how much Soren had sacrificed for the cult throughout his life. The betrayals, the pain, the centuries of suffering, the burden of carrying the entire cult alone while the whole universe hunted him endlessly. Only now, after becoming responsible for the cult himself, did Leo fully understand how heavy that burden truly was. And somehow, that realization made him respect Soren even more than before. I know you probably wouldn't want your brother left without a grave either, he muttered quietly. You were too much of a class act for that. A faint smile appeared briefly across Leo's face. So I'll try following your example at least once, he said, before kneeling beside Soren's grave, as he began to dig into the soil beside it slowly using his bare hands. Shovel, shovel. Taking out heaps of the earth with his demigod strength, he quickly dug a deep hole in the ground, before then slowly burying Calith's severed head in it, as he gave the Eternal Sovereign the burial he deserved. Rest in peace, you old fox. Leo muttered, before filling the hole back up, as he buried the face of the man who ruled the universe for thousands of years. If there is an afterlife, I do genuinely hope that you find peace in it. He prayed, as strangely enough, despite everything Calith had done, Leo no longer felt hatred while looking at him now. Instead, he only felt pity, as in the end, he saw how Calith died regretting the path he chose. And honestly, that felt far sadder than death itself. Scratch, scratch. To complete the tomb, Leo took a stone from nearby and began chipping and engraving it to make it a proper tombstone, as he wrote. Here lies Calith, firstborn son of the timeless assassin, the eternal sovereign of the universe. As in the end, he gave the man the respect he deserved. However, just as Leo finished paying his respects, his eyes suddenly narrowed slightly. Because from the distance, he sensed several aircraft rapidly approaching the Eternal Garden. Who dares? He muttered, as he turned to look towards deep space, where several thousand kilometers away, an entire fleet of Su clan ships seemed to be heading this way. On board a Su clan flagship, Su Yang's POV. The moment news regarding Calith's death spread across the Rainbow Stream, the Su clan immediately recognized the value of the opportunity before them, as they deployed Su Yang personally toward the Eternal Garden to secure as many moonshine flowers as possible for the clan. Unfortunately for them though, unlike the cult, the Su clan did not possess mastery over dimensional tunneling. And because of that limitation, even traveling at maximum speed through conventional methods still took them nearly a day and a half to finally arrive near the Eternal Garden's region of space. However, by then, they were already too late. Fizzed. Almost simultaneously, electronics flickered violently throughout every Su clan ship present within the fleet, as warning sirens blared briefly while several control panels temporarily lost power. What the hell? One pilot muttered in alarm while stabilizing the flagship's controls hurriedly. Meanwhile, within the command chamber, Su Yang immediately narrowed his eyes. Because unlike the panicking crew around him, he understood instantly what just happened. This was a warning, a deliberate one. Someone powerful enough to overwhelm the entire fleet effortlessly had intentionally released only enough aura to stop them without causing direct casualties. And the fact that such a being even bothered issuing a warning instead of immediately exterminating them meant only one thing. The person waiting ahead recognized the Su clan enough to show restraint. Kill the engines immediately, Su Yang ordered calmly, as his expression turned serious. Every ship stops moving right now. The surrounding officers immediately obeyed without hesitation. Sir, one commander asked nervously. Are we under attack? Su Yang slowly shook his head. No, he replied quietly. If this was an actual attack, we would already be dead. A heavy silence spread across the chamber hearing those words. Magnify the Eternal Garden, Su-Yang ordered next, as several operators quickly redirected the flagship's visual systems toward the distant floating divine land. The image sharpened gradually, and eventually, one solitary figure became visible standing near the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The moment Su-Yang recognized the man, his eyes widened slightly. Leo, he muttered softly. Across the bridge, several officers immediately became visibly tense hearing that name. Because after the events of planet Satoru, there was no longer a single major power within the Rainbow Stream that dared underestimate Leo Skyshard anymore. Especially after he personally killed Kalith. This is not an enemy we can engage militarily, Su-Yang declared firmly, as he crossed his arms while continuing to stare toward the projection screen. That warning shot earlier was him being merciful. One elder beside him frowned. So what do we do now, young master? Su-Yang remained silent for several moments before eventually sighing. Prepare a single landing pod, he ordered calmly. I'll go talk to my friend personally. Several officers immediately looked uneasy hearing that suggestion. Young master, with all due respect, this is dangerous, one advisor warned cautiously. Leo Skyshard is no longer merely the leader of the cult of Ascension, he's now a god-killing conqueror. Su-Yang simply chuckled hearing those words. For you, yes. But for me, he's still my friend. Su-Yang said, as a few minutes later, a small capsule pod detached itself from the Su clan flagship before slowly descending toward the Eternal Garden below. Inside the pod, Su-Yang quietly observed the floating divine world growing larger and larger through the transparent front display. And honestly, even from a distance, the Eternal Garden looked breathtaking. Golden trees shimmered beneath sunlight. Silver rivers reflected the skies beautifully. While entire mountain ranges seemed covered in glowing vegetation unlike anything found elsewhere within the Rainbow Stream. Damn, Su-Yang muttered softly. No wonder Kalith never wanted to leave this place. He muttered, as eventually, the pod touched down near the outer cliffs of the Eternal Garden. Hiss. The hatch opened slowly, as Su-Yang stepped outside before immediately feeling warm mana-dense energy brush against his skin gently. Well alright TTT. Su-Yang muttered while looking around with genuine admiration visible across his face. This place is insane. Then finally, his gaze landed upon Leo standing nearby. For several moments, Su-Yang simply stared at him silently. Because although Leo still looked mostly the same outwardly, something about him felt completely different now, as though the burden resting upon his shoulders had fundamentally changed him as a person. Still, despite that feeling, Su-Yang eventually smiled before walking toward him confidently. My man, he greeted casually, as he extended one hand forward. Leo stared toward the offered hand briefly before eventually shaking it. However, unlike Su-Yang's warmth, Leo's handshake felt noticeably restrained and controlled, as though he was greeting an important political figure rather than an old friend. So the rumors were true after all, huh? Su-Yang muttered, as he shook his head slowly. You really killed the Eternal Sovereign. Honestly man, if someone told me this back during the academy days, I would have thought they completely lost their damn mind. Leo chuckled softly hearing that. Yeah, well, the cult and Kalith had a lot of unfinished history between them. It had to be done, Leo replied quietly, as his eyes shifted briefly toward the distant ocean. Su-Yang nodded slowly hearing that answer. Then after glancing around the Eternal Garden once more, he finally got to the actual reason behind his visit. Well, he began casually, as he scratched his cheek awkwardly. I originally came here planning to plunder a bunch of moonshine flowers before another major power reached this place first. But since you already beat everyone to it, how about helping an old friend out a little? Leo sighed deeply hearing those words, as immediately, Su-Yang sensed the atmosphere around them changing. Listen to me carefully, old friend, Leo began calmly, as his tone became significantly more authoritative than before. Our friendship is real, there's absolutely no doubt about that. If one day you genuinely needed my help, I would cross half the universe to stand beside you in battle without hesitation. But when it comes to matters involving the cult and the Su clan, I am the cult master, and you are the young master of the Su clan. Official matters and personal relationships cannot be mixed together. The warmth from earlier disappeared completely from Leo's voice while he spoke, as Su-Yang's expression gradually stiffened hearing that response. Meanwhile, Leo slowly pointed toward the distant cliffside nearby. If you're looking for proof regarding how much the cult sacrificed to claim this place, then look over there, Leo said calmly, as Su-Yang turned slightly before noticing Soren's grave resting quietly near the ocean cliffs. It's not just him either. Generations of cult citizens sacrificed their lives so we could finally stand where we are today. The Eternal Garden was never some random territory for us. It was one of the symbols of everything stolen from the cult during the Great Betrayal. So no, there isn't a single moonshine flower here that I can casually hand over for free. Su Yang frowned upon hearing that. Even for the Su clan. Even for me, your old friend. He questioned seriously, as Leo nodded immediately in response. Even for the Su clan. And yes, even for you. Leo replied calmly. However, I'm not Caliph. I'm not insecure enough to monopolize power simply because I fear competition. If the Su clan wants moonshine flowers in the future, then I'll be happy to sell them to you at the right price. Just send the cult a proper proposal. We can negotiate resources, military cooperation, trade agreements, strategic partnerships, territory exchanges, or whatever else your clan is willing to offer. But understand one thing very clearly, Su Yang. From this day onward, there will only be one entity controlling the supply of moonshine flowers throughout the universe. And that entity shall be the Cult of Ascension. A heavy silence followed those words. And for several long moments, Su Yang simply stared toward Leo quietly. Because standing before him now no longer felt like standing before the academy rival he once knew. Nor did it feel like speaking to the cold assassin from a few years ago. Instead, it genuinely felt like speaking to the ruler of a rising empire. And somehow, that realization unsettled Su Yang far more than he expected. A few days later, planet Draconia, Multharax POV. The last major power within the universe to finally receive proper confirmation regarding Caliph's death was Multharic, as unlike the Great Clans and the Righteous Alliance, the dragons rarely paid attention to galaxy net broadcasts, political movements, or the affairs of lesser civilizations unless those matters directly concerned conquest and war. Which was why, nearly several days after the battle above planet Satoru already shook the rainbow stream into chaos, planet Draconia still remained consumed by its usual barbaric atmosphere. Roar! Massive dragons roared endlessly throughout the skies above the planet while volcanic smoke rose from gigantic mountain ranges endlessly erupting across the landscape, as rivers of lava illuminated the dark world beneath crimson skies permanently covered in ash and smoke. Meanwhile, within the dragon court itself, countless gigantic beasts feasted loudly upon roasted monster carcasses while entertainers sparred in the middle of the court to please the crowd. Thunk, crack, blood splattered, bones shattered, while drunken dragons laughed thunderously while watching the violence unfold before them. As it wasn't until the fight ended, and the next segment was scheduled to start, that a messenger dared interrupt the proceedings. "My lord," the messenger said while kneeling deeply, as almost instantly, the noisy atmosphere quieted slightly. Because unlike ordinary servants, messengers only interrupted the dragon court during important developments. "What is it?" Multharic asked slowly, as his golden eyes shifted towards the kneeling figure below. "My lord, the Cult of Ascension and its cult master, Leo Skyshard, have apparently killed some weakling god called Ruvasa alongside the eternal sovereign Caliph during a recent confrontation." The moment those words left the messenger's mouth, the entire dragon court erupted into laughter immediately. Ha 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 ha. That weakling finally died, so the eternal sovereign was just another fraud after all. Several dragons mocked loudly while slamming their tails against the ground repeatedly. Meanwhile, the messenger continued speaking confidently. And following the battle, Leo Skyshard publicly declared that the Cult of Ascension would conquer over half the rainbow stream within the next 50 years. A grin spread across the messenger's face afterward. "Personally speaking, I found the declaration amusing more than anything else." The surrounding dragon court immediately burst into another round of barbaric laughter hearing that statement. "Half the universe. That brat dreams too much. Should we burn down a few cult worlds to humble them?" Several war-hungry dragons began shouting aggressively while releasing flames from their mouths excitedly. As one enormous red-scaled dragon, who was an army commander, even stepped forward before bowing respectfully toward Multharic. "My king," he began seriously. "The cult has been expanding rapidly lately while making increasingly dangerous moves across the rainbow stream." His claws tightened slightly. "If you give the order, we can crush them before they become an actual problem worth worrying about." Almost instantly, countless dragons throughout the court roared in agreement. "Yes, crush them, burn their worlds." The violent atmosphere intensified rapidly. And yet strangely enough, the only individual within the entire dragon court who did not laugh or react emotionally at all was Multharic himself. As instead of mirroring their rage, the Dragon King's pupils slowly constricted while a faint smile gradually spread across his face. "So," Multharic muttered quietly while leaning back against his throne. "That boy has finally become a man, huh?" The surrounding dragons slowly quieted hearing those words. Because unlike them, Multharic understood exactly what kind of monster Leo Skyshard truly was becoming. After all, he personally trained Leo for a few years, and hence knew exactly what he was capable of. While more importantly, Multharic understood the terrifying significance behind Calith's death better than anyone else present within this room. Because defeating Calith was not merely a matter of power. It required absurd talent, planning, courage, and above all else, the mindset necessary to corner and kill another apex predator successfully. Which was precisely why Multharic never underestimated Leo even once. Do not provoke him, Multharic declared calmly, as instantly, the entire dragon court fell silent. If that boy wants half the universe. A dangerous grin slowly spread across the Dragon King's face. Then let him have it. Several dragons immediately looked shocked hearing that statement. Meanwhile Multharic slowly rose from his throne before stretching his humanoid body lazily. We will simply conquer the other half ourselves, he said, as he smashed his right foot against the ground heavily. Boom. The entire court trembled, as all dragons within instantly lowered their heads in submission. There are still many enemies left worth slaying before we turn our attention toward the cult. So first, we weed them all out, until it's either the cult who break the terms of our agreement, or until there is no other land left to conquer but cult lands. He declared, as a dangerous smile formed on his face. I understand it fully well, that the current universe is too small for both the dragons and the cult to coexist peacefully. As I have no question in my mind that eventually, we will be at odds. However, that day is not today, he said, as he shook his head in disappointment. I owe the boy my freedom. So until he breaks the terms of our alliance himself, or we have nowhere else to go, the peace holds, he declared, as the entire court simply obeyed his orders. I will someday become the undisputed king of the universe. However, I will not become one by breaking my word. I respect the boy, and that means, all of you will as well, he concluded, as the surrounding dragons stayed silent for a while, before eventually breaking into praises. Glory to the Dragon King. The king keeps his word. They cheered, yet despite all the roaring around him, Multharic merely raised one hand calmly for silence, as the crowd went silent once more. Calith's death has removed one of the universe's strongest predators from the board entirely. And while it is a shame that I never got the opportunity to kill the Eternal Sovereign myself, it is still an occasion worth celebrating, he declared before stretching both his hands outward as he called for all dragons to roar simultaneously. So tonight, his voice shook the volcanic palace itself. We feast in celebration, he yelled, as roar. The dragon court exploded into barbaric celebration instantly. Gigantic dragons slammed their tails repeatedly against the court ground while flames erupted endlessly throughout the skies above Draconia, as warriors roared drunkenly while beast carcasses continued roasting across enormous lava pits. And amidst all that chaos and celebration, Multharic simply stared silently toward the distant stars. As deep within his heart, the Dragon King already knew with certainty that one day, he and Leo Skyshard would eventually stand opposite one another at the peak of the universe itself. 3 years later, the Cult of Ascension. Over the next 3 years, time passed by in a complete blur for the Cult of Ascension, as the organization continued expanding across the rainbow stream at a pace that left the rest of the universe struggling to react properly. Planet after planet fell beneath the cult banner, as their superior technology and well-trained army decimated one enemy after another. Until eventually, by the end of the 3rd year following Calith's death, the cult officially controlled a total of 40 planets directly beneath its authority. A number that surpassed even the height of Soren's reign during the later years of his life, as the cult commoners could almost not believe that they were alive to see such good times return. However, while the expansion itself was impressive, what was even more terrifying was the fact that the universe itself had slowly begun accepting the cult's rise as something inevitable. Because while resistance remained fierce during the early stages of occupation across newly conquered worlds, over time, that resistance steadily declined. The citizens of the Righteous Alliance gradually realized that once a planet fell beneath cult control, nobody was coming to save them anymore. Not the great clans, not the remaining gods, not the Righteous Alliance armies. And strangely enough, the longer planets remained beneath cult occupation, the more rumors began spreading regarding life under cult rule. Stories about lower taxes. Stories about corrupt officials being executed publicly. Stories about military officials being punished for abusing civilians. Stories about cult worlds becoming safer and more prosperous than before. As slowly, the image of the cult across the universe began changing from a terrifying apocalyptic force into something significantly more complicated. The cult still inspired fear. However, it no longer inspired only fear. And that shift alone changed the political atmosphere of the Rainbow Stream completely. Meanwhile, While the cult continued conquering planets rapidly outwardly, the far more important transformation happened internally. Because over these 3 years, the machinery of the cult slowly evolved into something far more stable and self-sufficient than before. The organization no longer relied entirely upon Leo or General Sparrow to maintain order across every territory. As instead, regional commanders, merchant networks, military governors, and Chaosbringer's shadow network slowly began taking more responsibility by themselves, as the empire slowly became more and more self-reliant. Also, during this same period, 2 additional cult commanders successfully ascended into the monarch realm, with one of them being Leo's eldest son, Caleb. After reaching monarch rank, Caleb was officially promoted into the position of a frontline commander before receiving authority over his own independent military force. And despite his young age, Caleb adapted to the responsibility remarkably quickly. Over the next 2 years, he successfully led 2 separate planetary conquest campaigns personally, earning recognition across the cult as one of its fastest rising military stars. As although his fighting style resembled Leo's heavily, what was unique about him was his leadership style, as many praised him as an even greater strategic genius than Leo himself, earning him the title, the Wise Dragon, from the people. Meanwhile, Myron's growth followed a completely different path altogether. As unlike Caleb, whose rise came through direct military accomplishments and battlefield achievements, Myron spent nearly an entire year struggling to establish financial stability for the organization he created. Because maintaining an independent armed force within the cult required enormous resources constantly. Weapons, armor, transportation, housing, training facilities, personnel salaries, medical support. These were all necessary resources that needed to be procured, and during the early days, the group he founded lacked almost everything except loyalty, ambition, and belief in its purpose. He named them, the Fundamentalists, believing that the name reflected exactly what they stood for, a group willing to fight for their most fundamental beliefs no matter the cost. However, after spending several frustrating months idling around without direction, Myron eventually discovered the solution to his financial problems. Merchant protection. The cult was conquering new planets rapidly, however taking control over the industries, trade routes, mines, and resources of those worlds was neither easy nor safe. The merchants and businessmen eager to become first movers within newly conquered territories often needed additional protection that the formal cult army simply could not provide consistently. And so, over time, several wealthy cult merchants quietly approached Myron, seeking military protection across hostile territories where local resistance movements continued disrupting mining operations, transport routes, and commercial activity regularly. Unlike the formal cult army, which often moved too slowly through official chains of command, Myron's organization solved problems immediately through violence. And gradually, the fundamentalists began building their reputation. Whenever merchant caravans disappeared mysteriously across frontier worlds, the fundamentalists appeared. Whenever local rebels attacked cult businesses or sabotaged mining operations, the fundamentalists appeared. Whenever black market disputes spiraled beyond control and entire districts threatened descending into chaos, the fundamentalists appeared. And usually, once they arrived, the problems disappeared alongside them. Naturally, this caused Myron to gain the favor of several powerful merchant groups rapidly, as wealthy businessmen began funding his organization directly in exchange for long-term protection agreements and favorable treatment. Eventually, Myron used this growing support network to establish a permanent training facility and residential compound for his organization upon planet Yamana, while simultaneously building a second operational headquarters upon planet Satoru itself. From there, the fundamentalists slowly evolved into something far larger than a simple private military force. They became an underground power structure operating beneath the cult's formal legal framework entirely, acting almost like a parallel authority that handled disputes through intimidation, influence, violence, and fear whenever necessary. Trade routes, weapons distribution, private security, smuggling operations, debt collection, territorial enforcement. Over time, the fundamentalists quietly inserted themselves into nearly every profitable industry connected to unstable frontier worlds under cult influence. And despite their reputation terrifying ordinary righteous citizens living beneath cult occupation, the organization itself became wildly admired amongst lower-class cult civilians. Because unlike many members of the formal cult military, who often had to go through many legal barriers and authorizations to conduct operations, the fundamentalists acted instantly and without fear of consequences. If merchants exploited workers unfairly, the fundamentalists intervened. If criminals targeted cult civilians, the fundamentalists hunted them down personally. If corrupt local governors crossed certain invisible lines, sometimes those governors simply disappeared overnight without explanation. As over time, wearing the black uniform of the fundamentalists gradually became viewed by many younger cult citizens as something even more prestigious than wearing the standard cult army insignia itself. However, while Myron found himself extremely busy trying to run the fundamentalists, what he still did not miss out on was his personal training, as by the end of the second year, he too managed to ascend into the monarch realm, after purchasing the necessary breakthrough potion personally through his growing connections and wealth. And once he possessed enough power to lead planetary conquests himself, the fundamentalists slowly turned their attention toward neutral worlds and strategically important trade planets that Leo himself had little immediate interest in occupying. And surprisingly enough, Myron succeeded almost flawlessly. Despite having no formal experience leading a planetary raid, within less than a year after becoming a monarch, he personally led the fundamentalists during their first independent planetary campaign before successfully conquering a wealthy neutral world positioned along several major merchant routes. Officially, the planet belonged to the Cult of Ascension. Unofficially, however, everyone understood exactly who truly controlled it, as Myron ruled the world almost like a mafia king operating beneath the cult flag, while the merchant groups supporting him received enormous preferential trade rights and economic advantages throughout the entire system. And although Leo remained fully aware of what Myron was building behind the scenes, he never intervened. Because fundamentally speaking, the fundamentalists still strengthened the cult overall, even if their methods occasionally blurred the line between military organization and organized crime. Meanwhile, throughout all these developments, the surviving great clans steadily continued losing territory year after year. Planetary influence weakened, trade routes collapsed, allied noble houses defected, while the neutral systems shifted allegiance quietly. As slowly but surely, desperation began growing amongst the remaining powers of the universe. And precisely because of that, Morris waited patiently. Because unlike the rest of the universe, the deceiver understood something important. The true chaos had not even started yet. After all, the timeline attached to his soul contract with Leo had finally expired completely during these 3 years. Meaning that Morris was no longer bound by the restrictions preventing him from harming Leo or his family directly anymore. As somewhere deep within the endless storms surrounding planet Granada, the deceiver smiled, because finally, he was free to play the game properly once again. Planet Bennett Prime, Myron's POV. After successfully capturing his first planet, Myron spent a significant amount of time upon planet Bennett personally, as although conquering the world itself had been difficult, running it smoothly proved to be a completely different challenge entirely. My lord, some of the influential merchants on the planet don't like the fact that you're giving preferential tariff rates to cult merchants. They say it's against the spirit of fair trade, and that they're willing to negotiate some deals, if only you give them some concessions. An underling reported while Myron casually walked through the streets inspecting the quality of his rule. Cult merchants will always have preference. In the end, we work for the cult and its people, not them. Tell them free trade is an illusion. And remind them that they are the same bastards who have turned over cult citizens trying to hide in neutral planets for bounty rewards in the past. So they can't expect any mercy from us. Myron replied, as he looked around satisfied as he saw his fundamentalists' followers patrol every major intersection in the city. All right, the underling murmured, before moving on to the next report. My lord, if the mining output keeps increasing at this rate, then within another 6 months, we'll probably become fully self-sufficient in blue crystal refinement. The underling said, as Myron nodded in acknowledgement. Good. Once the merchants stop relying on imports entirely, the surrounding neutral systems will become economically dependent upon us instead. Myron theorized, as the subordinate smiled sharply at the economic competence displayed by his lord. Isn't that exactly what we wanted? He muttered. However, just as the conversation continued, Myron's footsteps suddenly slowed slightly. Because from across the street, a hooded figure quietly began walking toward him. At first glance, the man appeared completely ordinary. Simple black robes, average build, calm walking pace. And yet, the moment Myron looked directly toward him, a strange feeling instinctively crawled across his spine. As almost subconsciously, his eyes narrowed. What the hell? Myron thought internally, as something about the man immediately felt wrong to him. Because despite standing directly within his field of vision, Myron could not sense even the slightest trace of aura leaking from the hooded figure's body. And even stranger than that, Myron could not sense the man's mana signature either, as it was as though the individual approaching him possessed no life force whatsoever. Hey, Myron called out calmly while raising one hand slightly toward the approaching stranger. "What's your business here?" he asked, while trying to grab the man's shoulder, as the hooded man stopped but did not answer. As instead, the moment Myron's hand reached him, grab, the stranger instantly caught Myron's wrist tight. The hell? Myron thought in shock, as despite all his strength, he could not pull his hand back at all, as it seemed like the hooded man was much stronger than him. "The fuck?" he yelled, as almost instantly, his danger instincts exploded, as without hesitation, he immediately reached toward his waist with his free hand, attempting to draw his dagger. Yet before he could even touch the weapon, grab, the hooded man caught that wrist too. And suddenly, Myron found both his arms restrained completely. His pupils constricted instantly. Because despite all his experience, despite becoming a monarch, despite all the training Leo had given him while he was young, he had absolutely no idea when the stranger moved. Then suddenly, VWOOOM. A tiny sliver of aura leaked from the hooded figure's body briefly. And the moment it did, thud asterisk thud, both fundamentalist subordinates standing behind Myron collapsed unconscious onto the street immediately without even understanding what happened. Meanwhile, the surrounding civilians continued moving normally through the market district, completely unaware of the terrifying interaction unfolding right beside them. As though the hooded man somehow isolated the disturbance itself from the world around them. At that moment, cold sweat finally formed across Myron's neck. Because now, he understood clearly. This was an existence operating on a completely different level from himself. "Who the hell are you?" Myron questioned sharply while struggling against the grip restraining both his arms. "And what exactly do you want from me?" he asked, as this time, the hooded figure finally responded to his question. "Me, I'm Clarence, young boy. An old friend of your father. As for what I want nothing from you, but my master does. If you've heard about the deceiver Morris, then that's the man I serve. And he has requested to meet you," Clarence said, as Myron's eyes instantly flickered in recognition. Clarence was the demigod warrior serving the universal government. As back on the pit, his father had fought this man in what many described as a legendary battle. Struggle. Myron struggled against the man's grip strength, yet once again, he could not budge an inch, as Clarence began to scoff and chuckle. "Ha ha ha. You know, despite the reputation surrounding you, you're nowhere near as strong as your father. He could give me a hard time despite just being a monarch. But you, I can suppress without losing a breath," Clarence taunted, as Myron frowned. "You're lucky my master doesn't want you dead, because if he did, I'd have already finished you by now. However, what he does want is to meet you, so think about it and decide the meeting time and place in the next 3 days. And, if you're interested in taking my advice, then keep it a secret from your father," Clarence said, before slowly releasing Myron's hands. 3 days, he reminded again before turning to leave, as Myron watched his back blend in with the busy crowd, as the demigod disappeared from his sight. For several long moments afterward, Myron simply stood there silently, feeling too stunned by the interaction to move at all, before eventually bending down and lifting the unconscious bodies of his subordinates over his shoulders, as he began walking back toward his office slowly with a dark expression and burning rage hidden beneath his eyes. A few hours later, the Eternal Garden, Leo's POV. Slow walk. Giggles. The sound of Amanda giggling echoed through the empty plains of the Eternal Garden, as she walked hand in hand with Leo, as though the two of them were a newlywed couple on their honeymoon. Lately, the duo enjoyed such walks quite frequently, as ever since Leo had taken over this divine realm, the two enjoyed quite a lot of quality time together. However, while most of their walks went uninterrupted, today was not one such fortunate day, as midway through the walk, Leo sensed Shadow Number One's presence on his back. Sigh. Sighing deeply, Leo turned and said, "Cough it out, what is it this time?" he asked, as Shadow Number One immediately bowed deeply in apology. "My apologies, my lord," he replied respectfully. "It was never my intention to disturb your time with my lady, however something important has just happened." Amanda's expression shifted immediately hearing those words, while Leo's relaxed demeanor disappeared almost entirely. "Speak," Leo ordered calmly. "My lord, the demigod Clarence recently approached Myron personally upon Planet Bennett. And reports suggest that he restrained Myron briefly before delivering a message on behalf of the deceiver Morris. And reports suggest that he restrained Myron briefly before delivering a message on behalf of the deceiver Morris," Shadow Number One said, as the moment Leo heard the name, Morris, his expression changed instantly. "Oh," he muttered, as the calm on his face was replaced by a murderous fury, as Shadow Number One took in a deep gulp and continued. "Apparently, Clarence informed Myron that Morris wishes to meet him personally in 2 days' time, and that he can decide the time and place himself. He also advised Myron to keep the interaction hidden from you. Leo's eyes narrowed sharply hearing that statement. And Myron, what did he do? Leo asked, as Shadow Number 1 nodded in acknowledgement and said. Lord Myron informed the Shadows almost immediately after Clarence departed about everything that transpired. He looked ashamed at being manhandled more than anything else. But he's clean. Shadow Number 1 answered promptly, as hearing that, Leo's expression softened slightly. Was Myron hurt? Leo asked next, as despite everything else, that was what he cared about the most. No, my lord. Myron stated that Clarence completely overpowered him physically and restrained him without difficulty, however there were no signs of injury. Shadow Number 1 began, before pausing to think. Quote, I personally believe that the demigod must be operating under strict orders not to harm him. He added, as only then did Leo finally release a long breath. Because had there been even a single scratch on Myron's body, this situation would already have escalated far beyond negotiations or caution. Amanda looked toward him silently for a few moments before eventually speaking. You were seriously considering going to war over this, weren't you? She asked softly, as Leo let out a quiet chuckle hearing that. Of course I was, he admitted openly. If Morris thinks he can threaten my children without consequences, then he's completely out of his damn mind. His gaze shifted toward the distant ocean afterward while his eyes gradually grew colder. He waited until the soul contract expired before making his move. Leo muttered quietly. As expected from that lunatic. Amanda frowned slightly hearing that. Do you think he's trying to use Myron against you? She questioned. Leo remained silent briefly before shaking his head slowly. No, he replied calmly. Myron is smarter than that. A faint smirk appeared across Leo's face afterward. However, Morris isn't the type of man who approaches someone without purpose. He enjoys creating pressure, curiosity, doubt, temptation. And unfortunately, he's very good at it. Shadow Number 1 remained kneeling silently while waiting for further instructions. Eventually, Leo looked toward him once more. Double Myron's shadow protection detail quietly, Leo ordered. Do not interfere openly unless absolutely necessary. And, tell the boy to pay me a damn visit at once. I haven't seen him in 3 years, but I guess, it's time I finally forgive him. Leo said, as, yes, my lord, Shadow Number 1 replied immediately, before dispersing to carry out the orders. Meanwhile, on planet Bennett Prime, Myron's POV. Meanwhile, upon planet Bennett Prime, Myron sat isolated inside his private chamber with his head lowered between his arms, as ever since Clarence left earlier that day, he had not been able to calm the storm raging within his mind. Because what haunted him most was not the threat itself, nor Morris, nor even the possibility that he was being targeted by enemies far beyond his current level. No. What truly ate away at him was the humiliation. The crushing realization that Clarence walked directly onto his planet, restrained him effortlessly, spoke to him entirely on his own terms, and then casually left afterward while Myron could do absolutely nothing about it. Not a single thing. Bloody hell. Myron muttered bitterly while staring toward the floor beneath him. Just how damn weak am I? His fingers slowly clenched into fists afterward. I couldn't even put up half a decent fight. The memory replayed endlessly inside his mind. The speed. The grip strength, the overwhelming aura, the complete helplessness he felt while standing before Clarence. And the worst part was, Clarence did not even treat him like a threat. That was what truly shattered his pride. I'm Myron Skyshard, damn it. He muttered quietly, as his voice gradually grew heavier. My father made that same man tremble in his boots while still being a monarch. His words slowly trailed off there while he looked down toward his palms silently. And for perhaps the very first time in his entire life, Myron genuinely felt worthless, because until today, some arrogant part of him always believed that he was already strong. A monarch, a planetary conqueror, the founder of the fundamentalists, a rising figure within the cult, someone feared across countless worlds. And yet today, reality smashed those illusions apart effortlessly. Because compared to true monsters like Clarence, he was still weak, painfully weak. A long silence filled the chamber afterward while Myron continued staring toward his own trembling hands. Then eventually, he let out a quiet laugh. A bitter one. So this is what father saw all along, huh? He muttered softly. The universe beyond the monarch rank. For years now, he spent most of his time building influence, managing organizations, controlling territories, securing wealth, and expanding the fundamentalists across multiple worlds. And while he did continue training consistently throughout all those years, deep down, strength itself slowly stopped being his main obsession. Until today. Because now, after standing helplessly before Clarence, Myron finally understood something clearly. None of it mattered. Not the fundamentalists. Not his authority. Not the money. None of it meant a damn thing if someone stronger could simply walk onto his world and impose their will over him whenever they pleased. Never again, Myron muttered quietly, as his eyes slowly darkened. Never again, damn it. A dangerous pressure slowly began leaking from his body while mana around the chamber started fluctuating violently. The fundamentalists. The cult. All of it becomes meaningless if I don't possess enough strength to enforce my own will. His gaze gradually sharpened afterward while Clarence's face resurfaced inside his thoughts once more. Clarence, you bastard. Myron muttered coldly. You got the better of me today. His fingers tightened harder. But I swear on my life. The next time I see you, I'll kill you with my own dagger. The promise escaped his mouth slowly, yet the killing intent behind those words felt terrifyingly genuine. That's the promise of a skyshard. The next day, the Eternal Garden, Myron's POV. Upon Leo's summon, Myron arrived at the Eternal Garden the next day, as despite trying to appear calm outwardly, deep within himself, he still felt unusually nervous regarding this meeting. Ever since Leo cut him off years ago and forced him to build his own path independently, the relationship between the father and son had never truly returned to what it once was. And despite the fact that Leo recently began speaking to him normally again, some invisible wall still remained between them, making Myron feel strangely uneasy while standing before him now. Step, step. Walking slowly through the silver pathways of the Eternal Garden while golden leaves drifted peacefully around him, Myron quietly looked around at the ethereal scenery surrounding this divine realm. As strangely enough, looking at this scenery made him realize just how different a life his father was living compared to his, as while he rarely had time to enjoy peace and quiet anymore, Leo was living in an entire realm that had nothing but peace and quiet. Has the old man gone soft? He wondered for a moment before shaking his head, as he realized that it wasn't the old man going soft, but rather the fact that the old man had upgraded his lifestyle, after pulling the cult out of immediate danger. Eventually, as he continued walking, he finally spotted Leo waiting for him near the cliffs, as unconsciously, his eyes lowered slightly while his footsteps gradually slowed without him even realizing it himself. Am I intimidated by the old man? He wondered, as despite his usual confident personality, standing before Leo today, still somehow made him feel like a child once again. It's been a while, father, Myron muttered quietly while avoiding direct eye contact, as his voice sounded noticeably more restrained than it normally did during ordinary conversations. However, instead of responding coldly like Myron secretly feared he would, Leo simply walked toward him before pulling him into a warm and gentle embrace immediately. Hug. Back pat. Yes, it has, my son. Yes, it truly has, Leo replied softly, as hearing the warmth hidden behind those words caused Myron's tense body to relax slightly for the first time since arriving here. Because only now, after hearing that softness within Leo's voice again, did Myron finally realize that the man standing before him today was his father and not the cult master. And strangely enough, that realization alone almost made Myron emotional, as over the past few years, he genuinely began missing moments like this more than he liked admitting openly. Eventually, the two separated slowly, as this time, Myron finally looked directly into Leo's eyes properly without avoiding his gaze or lowering his head awkwardly like earlier. I think you already understand why I summoned you here today, Leo began calmly while observing his son carefully, as Myron immediately nodded without hesitation hearing those words. Yes, I know. It's because of Morris, Myron replied quietly, before pausing briefly while clenching his fists, as complicated emotions surfaced within him gradually. However, honestly speaking, father, I have absolutely no interest in meeting that snake whatsoever, because just hearing his name alone already irritates me more than enough. His gaze sharpened slightly afterward while years of buried emotions quietly resurfaced inside him one after another without restraint or hesitation anymore. But there is something else I need to admit to you today. Something that has honestly been bothering me for a very long time now, ever since you forced me to walk independently. Leo remained silent while listening carefully, as seeing that calm patience somehow only made Myron's emotions grow even heavier while standing before his father today. Father, only after you cut me off did I finally understand just how much you were actually doing for me throughout my entire life, Myron admitted slowly while his fingers tightened unconsciously beside him. Back then, I genuinely believed everything I possessed was something I naturally deserved, whether it was advancement potions, resources, protection, influence, opportunities, or connections that opened doors for me automatically. A bitter smile appeared briefly across his face afterward while disappointment toward his younger self became visible within his eyes gradually. And honestly, I was arrogant enough to believe I earned all those privileges entirely through my own talent and effort without properly appreciating the people supporting me behind the scenes. His gaze lowered briefly toward the ground beneath him while frustration and embarrassment quietly surfaced within his expression more visibly now. But only after I started building the fundamentalists independently, only after I spent years struggling to sustain my own organization financially, and only after personally experiencing how difficult it is to procure resources. Myron slowly looked back toward Leo again before continuing further without stopping this time. Did I finally realize how absurdly privileged I truly was growing up beneath your protection and uncle's love, because the things I once treated casually are things ordinary people spend entire lifetimes chasing unsuccessfully. A heavy silence settled between father and son afterward while the ocean waves crashed softly against the cliffs nearby, creating a strangely peaceful atmosphere around the conversation. You joined the cult as an outsider. You built your reputation yourself, climbed through endless suffering, betrayal, bloodshed, and war until eventually becoming the cult master entirely through your own merit and perseverance. His voice grew more emotional with every passing sentence while years of buried respect finally surfaced openly through his words without concealment anymore. Meanwhile, I was born directly into power. I had mother, I had you, I had protection, influence, resources, opportunities, and a family name capable of intimidating entire worlds automatically. Myron shook his head slowly afterward while quietly laughing at his own past arrogance and ignorance regarding the reality surrounding his privileged upbringing. And the worst part is that I genuinely failed to appreciate any of it properly while I still had it, because I was too arrogant and immature to understand what true struggle actually meant. He clenched his jaw tightly afterward before finally saying the words lingering within his heart for years now. So today, I just want to say this honestly. I understand now. I understand why you became strict with me, why you wanted me to struggle, and why you wanted to run the cult the way you do. A faint bitterness entered his expression afterward while regret quietly surfaced within his gaze once more. If I understood back then what I understand today, then honestly speaking, I would never have behaved the way I did while growing up beneath your protection. The confession ended there, as strangely enough, once those words finally left his chest properly, Myron felt lighter than he had felt in many years. Meanwhile beside him, Leo simply stared silently toward his son for several moments while genuine surprise gradually surfaced within his usually calm expression naturally. Because if there was one thing Leo understood extremely well about Myron, it was that the boy absolutely despised empty flattery and meaningless emotional manipulation. Which meant that everything he just said today was genuine. As smiling softly afterward, Leo stepped forward before pulling Myron into another warm embrace while responding calmly without hesitation or awkwardness between them anymore. I struggled because I wanted the next generation to struggle less than I did, and if you struggle now, then it should only be so your own children someday are born into a world even better than yours. Myron remained silent hearing that answer, because somehow, those simple words hit him harder emotionally than anything else spoken throughout today's entire conversation between them so far. As eventually, Leo gestured for him to walk alongside him casually, as the two slowly began strolling through the eternal garden side by side. Morris is an extremely difficult existence to understand properly, and while I completely understand why you have absolutely no interest in meeting him, you also need to understand something important, which is that it is always better to keep your friends close and enemies closer, instead of remaining blind regarding their intentions. A dangerous calm lingered behind Leo's words while he continued speaking steadily without any visible emotional fluctuation upon his face whatsoever. If Morris is plotting something, then I would rather know about it beforehand than let him spring a surprise on me. Myron nodded quietly while listening carefully beside him, as despite his personal aversion to meeting the deceiver, he decided to respect his father's wishes. So what I want you to do is, arrange the meeting here, in the Eternal Garden, so that I can be beside you when you talk. Leo continued while his gaze shifted briefly toward Myron. With me by your side, your safety will never become a question, while together we can figure out what that fox is up to. Leo said, as Myron looked toward Leo silently for several moments afterward before eventually nodding seriously without offering even the slightest bit of resistance or argument toward the proposal. If that is what you desire, father, then that is exactly what we shall do, Myron replied calmly, as the obedient answer genuinely caught Leo slightly off guard internally. Has my son really grown up? Leo could not help but wonder, as this version of Myron was something that not even he had expected at all. The next day, Planet Granada, Morris's POV. Kaboom! Thunder rolled violently across the storm-covered skies of Planet Granada while endless rain poured over the single rock beneath, as Morris sat lazily upon his stone throne while quietly staring toward the white lightning flashing across the heavens. The violent weather surrounding him reflected his mood strangely well today, because despite maintaining his usual confident appearance, deep within himself, Morris felt unusually restless and dissatisfied regarding the current state of the universe. Initially, his plan had been relatively straightforward. Ally with the cult. Ally with the dragons. Use both rising powers to dismantle Caliph and the Righteous Alliance gradually until the old balance ruling the universe finally collapsed beneath its own weight. And for a very long time, Morris genuinely believed that such a strategy would eventually place him in the perfect position to seize control of the universe once all the other major powers exhausted themselves fighting one another. However now, the situation had evolved far faster than even he could ever have predicted. It no longer makes sense for the cult to ally with me anymore. Morris muttered quietly while rainwater dripped endlessly from the edges of his throne onto the cracked rock below. I never anticipated Leo Skyshard obtaining Origin Metal this early into the game, nor did I expect him to begin killing gods at such an absurd pace. His fingers tapped slowly against the armrest while distant lightning illuminated his pale face briefly beneath the dark skies hanging above Granada. I thought Skyshard would take at least a century to go from demigod to god, and during this time he would be persecuted by Caliph and his goons. At which point I could offer him an alliance and scoop a talent like him early. However, he turned out to be a god-killing monster at just the demigod stage. Which makes it unlikely that he needs me for anything anymore. Morris muttered while looking concerned, because despite his reputation for madness, manipulation, and deception, Morris understood strategy and politics better than almost anyone else currently alive within the Rainbow Stream. And the current political situation genuinely concerned him. Caliph, Ruvasa and Yukiro are dead. He muttered while leaning slightly forward upon his throne. The cult doesn't need my support, and neither do the dragons. That realization alone changed everything. Because originally, Morris planned on positioning himself as a necessary ally. A balancing force. A wildcard capable of tipping the scales between competing superpowers whenever necessary. However now, if both forces continued growing uninterrupted over the next several decades, then eventually, only two true powers would remain standing at the peak of the universe. The cult, and the dragons, which naturally meant that Morris himself would slowly become irrelevant within the new world order being born. And that, he muttered softly while rain continued pouring endlessly across his shoulders, is completely unacceptable. A dangerous smile slowly spread across his face while violent lightning flashed repeatedly across the skies above Granada once more. Because Morris had absolutely no intention whatsoever of becoming a secondary figure within someone else's story. I either need to eventually pit the cult against the dragons, or rally the surviving gods beneath my banner and find a way to eliminate one of the two rising monsters first. He murmured quietly while smiling evilly. However, although he fantasized about stabbing Moltheric 1,000 times in those ugly dragon eyes of his, the problem with this plan was the timing. Because currently, neither the cult nor the dragons possessed any genuine reason to clash directly against one another yet. Leo respected Moltheric. Moltheric respected Leo. And both sides currently benefited greatly from allowing the other to weaken the remaining great clans independently. Which meant that if Morris truly wanted conflict between them eventually, then he would need to create that conflict personally through careful manipulation of several key figures. KZZZZT. At that exact moment, the crystal communicator resting beside Morris suddenly buzzed lightly, signaling the arrival of an important message. Ah, Clarence, he muttered calmly while activating the communication crystal. What news do you bring me today? Did the Skyshard child accept my proposal? Morris questioned while Clarence's projection materialized before him through the communication crystal immediately. Yes, Lord Morris. Myron Skyshard accepted the meeting proposal. Clarence reported respectfully. However, the location he selected for this meeting is the Eternal Garden. Which makes me believe that Leo Skyshard will be present for this meeting. He reported, as for several long moments, Morris remained completely silent. Then suddenly, ha 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 ha. He burst into loud laughter while the surrounding storms intensified violently. So the rumors suggesting that the second child became some uncontrollable outlaw were completely false after all. Morris muttered while amusement flickered visibly within his eyes. In the end, it seems he truly is his father's son. He said while slowly leaning back against his throne once more before disconnecting the communication crystal casually. Sigh. Sighing deeply, Morris shook his head in disappointment, because by now, Morris already possessed a fairly good idea regarding which side he wanted to support moving forward. Given the current balance of power within the universe, the only alliance that still offered him genuine long-term benefit now was an alliance with the surviving great clans. Because from his perspective, the only acceptable future remaining was one where both the cult and the dragons destroyed each other completely while he emerged afterward as the final ruler standing above the ashes. However, for such a future to become reality, Morris understood that he would first need to manipulate countless moving pieces carefully over the coming decades. He needed the surviving gods to accept him as their overlord. He needed the cult and dragons to grow weary of one another. And most importantly, he needed to eventually pit Leo Skyshard and Multheric directly against one another. I need to orchestrate the next great betrayal. Morris muttered quietly as the madness in his eyes deepened. An event where both Leo Skyshard and Multheric fall together, alongside their strongest supporters and a massive army. A dangerous smile slowly formed across his face while endless rain continued pouring across the lonely throne. Because only then, he whispered softly, shall I have the entertainment that will keep me satisfied for a millennia. A couple days later, the Eternal Garden, Morris's POV. A couple days later, despite fully understanding that manipulating Myron in front of Leo would be nearly impossible, Morris still arrived at the Eternal Garden personally while presenting himself like a humble guest visiting old acquaintances. Skyshard. Or should I call you Godkiller now? Ha 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 ha. How is your finger holding up these days? Morris asked cheerfully the moment he arrived upon the Eternal Garden, as Leo simply stared toward him coldly without even the slightest trace of amusement visible within his eyes. What? Is he the bastard who cost father a finger? Myron wondered silently, as until this very moment, he genuinely had no idea how Leo lost his finger or what sort of battle it even related to. And this must be the young Skyshard himself, the so-called rebel king, Myron Skyshard. Morris muttered while slowly sizing Myron up from head to toe, as Myron simply stared back at him with visible disgust written plainly across his face. Has your mother never taught you how to dress properly? Why are you walking around half naked like some uncivilized caveman? If you need money to buy decent clothes, I can always provide you with some. Myron replied bluntly, as hearing those words, Morris immediately burst into loud manic laughter. Ha, ha 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 ha. The god laughed wildly while clutching his stomach, however beneath that crazed amusement, his eyes gradually sharpened ever so slightly. The boy truly doesn't fear me at all, cult master. He must possess tremendous confidence in your ability to protect him if he dares insult me directly to my face so casually. Morris observed calmly, as almost instinctively, Leo's hand drifted toward the dagger resting against his waist, while somewhere within the distance, Ver, Dumpy, and Leonardo subtly released portions of their aura in response. Oh, I see now. So this gathering was a party all along. Morris muttered while casually glancing around the Eternal Garden, as although the others remained outside ordinary visual range, he could still sense and see them perfectly. You really shouldn't create enemies you cannot afford to eliminate permanently, young man. Your father and his commanders may be standing beside you today, however they will not remain beside you every second of your life. And I can strike whenever I please. Morris warned calmly, as hearing those words, it was Leo who finally chuckled softly next. Ha, ha ha ha. Leo laughed quietly without warmth while tightening his grip around the hilt of his dagger slightly. Threatening my son's life directly in front of me. Isn't that perhaps the dumbest thing you could possibly do, deceiver? Leo questioned calmly, as for several moments, Morris simply stared directly into Leo's eyes while genuinely considering whether provoking a fight here would be entertaining enough. Eventually though, he merely waved his hand dismissively. Oh please, I was merely educating the boy. And regarding your earlier question, no, my mother never had the opportunity to teach me proper manners. You see, I killed her when I was only 5 years old. She was becoming terribly restrictive regarding my hobbies. Morris explained casually while madness flickered visibly inside his eyes, as only then did Myron fully understand just how genuinely insane the deceiver truly was beneath the skin of a man. Silence lingered between them briefly after that moment until eventually Leo snapped his fingers lightly. *TRRRR. A small stone table alongside several matching chairs materialized beside them instantly through controlled mana manipulation, as Leo calmly gestured for Morris to sit. Ah, this really brings back memories. Morris muttered nostalgically while pretending to wipe tears from the corners of his eyes despite there being none present. I used to sit across from Caliph here fairly often through the centuries. Strangely enough, I almost miss him now that he's dead. Morris admitted casually, as Leo merely intertwined his fingers together before leaning slightly forward across the table while staring quietly into the deceiver's eyes. So, tell me Skyshard, how exactly did you do it? How did you manage to kill a god while still remaining only a demigod? Morris questioned curiously, however Leo merely let out a slow breath before responding calmly. You requested this meeting with my son personally, Lord Morris. He's a busy man, and so am I. So how about we keep this conversation focused strictly on the actual reason you came here today? Leo suggested calmly, as Morris immediately burst into loud laughter again hearing those words. Strictly professional. Ha 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 ha. That's a good one, Skyshard. Morris laughed while slapping his thighs repeatedly, as Myron stared toward him like he genuinely believed several screws inside the old man's head were missing. Well, if I'm being completely honest, I originally became interested in meeting your son because I enjoy recruiting talented young individuals beneath my banner whenever opportunities present themselves. And after hearing rumors that you supposedly cut him off from your support entirely, I naturally thought perhaps I could swoop in and recruit him away for myself. However, clearly, those rumors were wildly inaccurate. Morris explained openly, as Myron immediately frowned hearing those words. Even if Father did actually cut me off completely and I desperately needed support, there's still no universe where I'd willingly partner with a lunatic freak like you. Myron replied bluntly, as once again Morris burst into uncontrollable laughter. Ha 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 ha. This child genuinely has absolutely no filter on his tongue whatsoever, does he? Morris observed while shaking his head slowly in disappointment. Boy, let me teach you something important. If you genuinely believe speaking recklessly and insulting gods directly to their faces makes you special or courageous, then you're deeply mistaken. All it really tells me is that you still lack the emotional restraint necessary to hide your hatred properly when facing someone you despise. And honestly speaking, that lowers your value tremendously in my eyes. You should learn from your father sitting beside you. That man hates me far more deeply than you ever could, yet he still addresses me respectfully as Lord Morris whenever we speak. And that is genuinely terrifying. Because a man fully capable of controlling his emotions is always infinitely more dangerous than someone ruled by them. Morris explained calmly, as beside him, Leo quietly nodded in agreement while secretly hoping Myron actually absorbed at least part of that advice properly. Oh, shut the hell up already, old man. I don't need parenting lessons from some deranged psychopath. I already have my father for that. Myron snapped back irritably while clenching his fists tightly beneath the table. You think I lack emotional restraint? Fine, maybe I do. But let me make one thing perfectly clear then. Someday I'm going to carve that underling of yours called Clarence apart piece by piece with my own dagger. And after I'm done with him, I'll eventually come for you too. There's absolutely no hidden meaning behind those words, so feel free to do whatever the hell you want with them. Myron declared coldly, as for the first time in a very long while, Morris genuinely lost control of his laughter completely. Because throughout thousands of years of existence, very few individuals had ever disrespected him this openly while fully understanding exactly who he was. You see, cult master. Morris muttered while slowly leaning back against his chair, as the crazed amusement lingering within his eyes gradually faded into something colder and significantly more dangerous. Just like how you possess very little tolerance for threats directed toward your children, I possess very little tolerance for threats directed toward myself. The difference between us, however, is that while you place emotional value upon familial bonds and attachments, I place that same value upon my own existence instead. A twisted smile slowly spread across his face while rain clouds rumbled far above the eternal garden's distant skies. And unfortunately, your son has now openly declared his intention to kill both Clarence and myself someday. Which means, Morris tilted his head slightly while staring directly toward Myron, that you and I will most likely stand on opposite sides of a battlefield eventually. His smile widened further. Honestly speaking, that outcome is rather unfortunate for you, because I genuinely believe the two of us had tremendous potential to become useful allies. Morris explained calmly, as beside him, Leo suddenly let out a low chuckle before slowly shaking his head. Don't try playing your little mind games with my son, deceiver. At least not while I'm standing right beside him. Leo replied calmly while his gray eyes remained locked onto Morris without wavering even slightly. Myron might still be too young and inexperienced to fully understand how people like you operate beneath the surface. But I'm not. A dangerous calm gradually settled within Leo's voice while even the surrounding atmosphere of the eternal garden seemed to grow heavier. I can see straight through you. Leo continued while intertwining his fingers together atop the stone table calmly. There was never any realistic possibility for us to become allies the moment Caliph died, and you know that very well yourself. Leo said, as Morris maintained a perfectly neutral expression hearing those words. Outwardly, he pretended as though the theory Leo was spouting made no sense, and yet, internally, he already understood Leo's conclusion was almost entirely correct. The dragons are currently our allies. The great clan gods are our enemies. And neither myself nor the cult possesses any particular affection toward you whatsoever. Leo explained steadily while Morris quietly listened without interrupting him. The only genuine opportunity you ever had to align yourself beside the cult existed before Calith's death. Back when the universe still feared the righteous alliance enough for your support to carry actual strategic value. Leo leaned slightly forward while his eyes sharpened faintly. However, now that Calith, Ruvasa, and Yukiro are already gone, there's no longer anything valuable enough that you can offer us to justify trusting someone like you. For several moments, Morris simply stared toward Leo silently with a perfectly unreadable expression upon his face. Then eventually, he smiled. A thin smile, one carrying neither amusement nor warmth. And here I thought this meeting would remain civil. Morris muttered lightly, as Leo merely shrugged in response. You also lied about why you wanted to meet my son. You never wanted to recruit him. Oh hell no. You wanted to meet my son because you hoped to manipulate him the same way you manipulated Calith all those years ago. Leo continued calmly while Myron's gaze immediately shifted sharply toward Morris. However, fortunately for me, I did a significantly better job raising my children than the timeless assassin did with Soren and Calith. A faint smirk appeared briefly across Leo's face while Morris's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. My children aren't nearly as easy to manipulate. And unlike the timeless assassin, I'm not forgiving enough to tolerate threats directed toward them lightly. The atmosphere surrounding the stone table gradually became suffocatingly tense while distant waves continued crashing endlessly against the Eternal Garden's cliffs below. So from this day onward, you should watch your back carefully, deceiver. Leo warned quietly while slowly rising from his chair. Because you never truly know when the cult may decide to come for you next. With my dagger aiming straight for your throat. Leo threatened before standing up. As the moment he stood up, the stone table and chairs immediately dissolved back into loose mana particles, forcing Morris to rise as well. I suggest you leave now, Lord Morris. Before I decide that attacking you here sounds more enjoyable than continuing this conversation some other day. Leo declared calmly, as for several moments, Morris simply stared at him silently before suddenly bursting into laughter once more. Ha 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 ha. You really are becoming more and more like the timeless assassin every single year, Skyshard. If I squinted my eyes enough and just sensed your aura instead of looking at your face, I could mistake you for him. Morris muttered, while shaking his head. But we all know how the timeless assassin's story ended. Don't we? He threatened, while wiping imaginary tears from his eyes dramatically. Honestly speaking, I almost feel nostalgic. He muttered while raising one hand casually toward empty space beside him. FSHHHH. A fourth-dimensional void tore open instantly beside Morris while violent spatial energy distorted the surrounding air. It feels like the time when we plotted to take another cult master down. He muttered, before slowly walking towards the portal. Well then, until next time then, Skyshard. He said at last. However, just before fully entering the dimensional tunnel, he briefly turned his head back toward Leo and Myron one final time. And the deranged smile lingering across his face in that moment told both father and son the exact same thing clearly. That this conflict was far from over. And that although Morris was retreating peacefully today, the next time they saw the deceiver, it was going to be anything but peaceful. Shish. The dimensional portal closed soon after, as only then did Myron let out a complicated sigh. As although Leo seemed to have handled things today, somewhere deep down Myron could not help but wonder if he had made things unnecessarily difficult for the cult and his father because of his loud mouth. 2 years later, the Eternal Garden, Leo's POV. Following the confrontation with Morris upon the Eternal Garden, the next couple years passed in relative peace for the Cult of Ascension, as no major universal conflict erupted during that period despite the tension steadily building beneath the surface. The cult continued expanding its influence steadily across the Rainbow Stream while more neutral systems quietly submitted beneath their authority voluntarily, choosing stability beneath cult administration over uncertainty beneath weakening Great Clan influence. And strangely enough, as the cult's territories expanded further and further outward, resistance across newly conquered planets gradually became weaker with every passing year. Because by now, most ordinary citizens throughout the universe had already accepted one simple truth. The cult was not going anywhere. Meanwhile, with the tension between father and son finally repaired properly, Myron began visiting the Eternal Garden far more frequently than before, as whenever he was not managing the fundamentalists or overseeing operations upon Planet Bennett, he could usually be found training beneath Leo directly. Ever since his encounter with Clarence, if there was one thing Myron pursued obsessively above all else now, it was personal strength. And under Leo's guidance, his growth rapidly accelerated. Because although Myron always possessed tremendous talent naturally, the thing he lacked previously was discipline and proper direction. However now, after personally experiencing helplessness before a true monster, he trained with a desperation bordering upon madness. Meanwhile, Caleb continued achieving one military success after another across the front lines, as over these 2 years, he delivered several nearly flawless conquest campaigns while earning increasing respect from fellow commanders and soldiers alike. As slowly but surely, he became one of Leo's most trusted military leaders. "We did a good job raising them, Amanda," Leo said once, as watching both his children grow steadily into capable individuals in their own ways genuinely made Leo feel proud. However, despite the peaceful atmosphere outwardly surrounding the cult during these years, Leo never once lowered his guard internally. Because ever since the day Morris departed from the Eternal Garden smiling like a lunatic, Leo fully understood that another great conflict was inevitably approaching the universe sooner or later. Which was precisely why, 2 years later, when Shadow Number 1 arrived carrying an urgent report, Leo immediately understood something important had finally shifted. "My lord, there has been an interesting development across the Rainbow Stream lately," Shadow Number 1 reported respectfully while kneeling before Leo inside one of the Eternal Gardens overlooking pavilions, as Leo calmly gestured for him to continue. "My lord, we always understood that the dragons lacked the population necessary to maintain stable control over the number of planets they were conquering. As while the dragon race itself is individually powerful, their total numbers remain far too limited to properly administer and occupy more than roughly 20 worlds simultaneously," Shadow Number 1 explained calmly while several holographic planetary maps materialized before Leo automatically. However, despite this limitation, Multheric continued expanding aggressively regardless, and as of now, dragon-controlled territory has already exceeded 40 planets total, which naturally spread their military presence extremely thin. Leo nodded slowly hearing that explanation, because he already understood this problem long ago himself. The dragons were terrifying conquerors. However, they were terrible administrators. Initially, the dragon race only controlled a handful of worlds directly beneath their authority, and although their population increased significantly during recent years, their growth was nowhere near sufficient enough to support a proper interstellar empire spanning dozens of planets. And because Multheric kept prioritizing conquest endlessly, the cracks within dragon territory were eventually bound to appear. "My lord, approximately 24 hours ago, the surviving great clans launched a massive coordinated counter-offensive against dragon-occupied territories," Shadow Number 1 continued while several planets upon the holographic display changed color rapidly. "The Mu clan, Lu clan, and Du clan have each successfully reclaimed 3 planets already, for a total of 9 worlds retaken from dragon control within a single day." Leo narrowed his eyes slightly hearing those words, however, he wasn't completely shocked either. "Yeah, honestly speaking, that was inevitable," Leo muttered calmly while observing the holographic maps carefully. Multheric is an extraordinary warrior personally, however administration was never his strength. And the dragon army beneath him behaves like a pack of barbarians most of the time. A faint smirk appeared across Leo's face afterward. Hopefully this disaster teaches them at least some degree of restraint moving forward, Leo muttered. However, instead of relaxing hearing his response, Shadow Number 1's expression grew even more serious. "My lord, I believe there's more happening beneath the surface here," he warned quietly, as Leo's gaze immediately shifted toward him sharply. "The surviving great clan gods are terrified of Multheric normally. Under ordinary circumstances, none of them would possess the courage necessary to provoke the dragons directly to this extent." Several additional battle reports appeared across the holographic projection while Shadow Number 1 continued explaining. However, across 4 of the 9 major campaigns launched during the counter-offensive, Clarence and Terrence were both personally spotted fighting alongside great clan forces upon the front lines. The moment Leo heard those names, a slow smile gradually spread across his face. Because immediately, the missing piece fell into place perfectly inside his mind. "I see," Leo muttered softly while leaning back against his chair. "So the alliance has finally become official." Shadow Number 1 nodded silently in agreement. "Yes, my lord. Based on our current intelligence, I believe the surviving great clan gods have formally entered into an alliance with Morris behind closed doors." For several moments, silence lingered inside the pavilion. Then suddenly, "Ha ha ha ha," Leo burst into low laughter while shaking his head slowly. Because honestly speaking, this development was something he had already been expecting for years now. Ever since Morris left the Eternal Garden that day, Leo understood clearly that eventually the great clan gods would become desperate enough to crawl toward the deceiver for protection. They feared the cult. They feared the dragons. And more than anything else, they feared becoming irrelevant within the new universe being born. I figured this would eventually happen, Leo admitted calmly while the amusement gradually faded from his expression once more. The great clan gods are cowards by nature. The moment survival became uncertain, they were always going to gather beneath the strongest manipulator willing to protect them. His eyes slowly narrowed afterward while his tone became colder. And Morris, that lunatic has probably been waiting for exactly this moment patiently for years. Shadow number 1 remained silent while Leo quietly organized his thoughts internally. Because now, the shape of the coming conflict finally became significantly clearer. The cult, the dragons, Morris, the surviving great clan gods. All the major powers within the universe were slowly beginning to drift toward inevitable collision. I see, Leo muttered once more while resting one hand against his chin thoughtfully. So the final war is probably approaching sooner than expected. A dangerous calm settled across the pavilion afterward while distant winds continued blowing softly across the eternal garden's silver trees nearby. Tell the Shadow Network to sharpen their surveillance immediately. I want constant monitoring placed upon every important figure connected to Morris, the surviving great clans, and the dragon territories alike. Leo instructed calmly while Shadow number 1 listened attentively without missing a single word. I highly doubt these recent campaigns are isolated events. Something bigger is coming within the next couple years. His gaze slowly drifted toward the distant skies overhead. And when that event finally arrives, I refuse to allow the cult to be manipulated into dancing according to Morris's plans. Leo declared quietly while a cold smile slowly appeared across his face. We already know the deceiver is preparing the board for something enormous. Which means we still possess the advantage. His eyes sharpened faintly afterward. Because if there's one thing I'm confident about, it's that we're smart enough not to let him have his way. Meanwhile, planet Draconia, the Dragon Court. Entertainment flowed endlessly through the Dragon Court as drunken laughter, roaring cheers, and the scent of roasted flesh filled the massive open hall beneath Draconia's crimson skies. High upon the elevated throne overlooking the court, Multharic sat lazily while resting one elbow against the armrest beside him, as his golden reptilian eyes quietly observed the chaos unfolding below with visible amusement. Today's entertainment came in the form of 2 captured one-horned unicorns dragged in from some distant corner of the universe, as both beasts had been drugged heavily until madness completely consumed their minds. Foam dripped from their mouths. Bloodshot eyes glowed wildly. And the moment the chains restraining them snapped loose, both creatures immediately charged toward one another violently. Boom! Their horns collided head-on while the surrounding dragon court exploded into barbaric excitement instantly. Take the black one down. Ha ha ha. My money's on the brown beast. I'm eating whichever one dies first. The dragons roared while slamming their massive bodies and tails against the stone floor repeatedly, causing the entire court to tremble beneath the force of their excitement. Meanwhile in the center arena, the 2 unicorns continued tearing into one another savagely while blood splattered across the ground beneath them. Eventually however, the brown unicorn finally gained the upper hand. Shkeke. Its horn pierced straight through the black unicorn's neck brutally before lifting the dying creature partially off the ground. Blood sprayed everywhere, while the black unicorn collapsed moments later, as the entire dragon court immediately erupted into cheers. Yeah, ha 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 ha. The surviving brown unicorn stood trembling within the arena while drenched in blood from head to toe, as all eyes slowly turned toward Multharic sitting above the court. At first, the Dragon King simply raised one thumb upward while smiling faintly. Instantly, barbaric celebration erupted even louder. However then, slowly, Multharac's expression turned cold, and the raised thumb gradually shifted downward instead. The atmosphere inside the dragon court instantly froze. Then, FWOOOOOSH. Countless dragons unleashed dragon breath simultaneously toward the fighters, as both unicorns were incinerated instantly beneath overwhelming torrents of flame until nothing remained except ash. Ha 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 ha. Fucking herbivores. Bring us real warriors next time. The dragons shouted rowdily while servants hurried forward to clear the arena once more. Yet amidst all the chaos and celebration, a lone figure quietly entered the dragon court from the distant entrance. General Kratos. The moment the surrounding dragons noticed him, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Because if one of the imperial generals entered the court personally during entertainment hours, then it usually meant something important happened. That's Kratos. The general is here. Several dragons muttered quietly while their excitement gradually died down. Meanwhile, Kratos walked steadily toward the elevated throne before eventually kneeling respectfully before Multharic. My lord, Kratos began slowly while lowering his head deeply. I am ashamed to report that our frontline forces have suffered a massive failure. Multheric raised one eyebrow hearing those words. The faint amusement lingering upon his face disappeared almost immediately. What do you mean by massive failure? Multheric questioned calmly, as Kratos gritted his teeth visibly before continuing further. My lord, the cowardly humans launched a coordinated counter-offensive against our territories. A dangerous silence slowly spread throughout the Dragon Court hearing those words. 9 planets were attacked simultaneously. And, all 9 were taken back successfully. Kratos reported quietly while lowering his head even further. There are no survivors among the stationed dragon overlords. For several long moments, absolute silence consumed the Dragon Court completely. Even the drunken dragons previously shouting moments ago now remained frozen quietly beneath the terrifying pressure gradually leaking from Multheric's body. Then slowly, the Dragon King stood up from his throne. What? Multheric questioned quietly. Yet despite the calmness within his voice, the surrounding dragons immediately felt cold fear crawl across their spines hearing that single word. Kratos swallowed nervously before repeating himself carefully. All 9 planets have fallen back beneath Great Clan control, my lord. Roughly 5 years of conquest have been erased in a single day. He explained while the pressure within the Dragon Court gradually became suffocatingly heavy. Then suddenly, ha 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 ha, Multheric began laughing, a low laugh initially. However, with every passing second, the laughter gradually became louder, harsher, and significantly more dangerous. So those pathetic little humans finally decided they want to die sooner. Multheric muttered while his smile twisted into something terrifying. The surrounding dragons immediately moved backward instinctively while several of them literally pressed themselves behind nearby pillars to avoid attracting the Dragon King's direct attention. Because every single dragon present understood something important. Multheric was furious. Who the fuck do those insects think they are? Multheric growled while his aura exploded outward violently. Boom. The entire Dragon Court trembled instantly beneath the pressure. Several weaker dragons collapsed onto their knees immediately while cracks spread across nearby pillars. I let them survive for too long. Multheric muttered while his golden eyes glowed murderously beneath the stormy skies overhead. And now those fools actually believe they can reclaim dragon territory. A violent smile slowly spread across his face afterward. They must truly have forgotten what kind of monsters we are. Kratos remained kneeling silently while the surrounding Dragon Court collectively held its breath nervously. Because everyone already understood what was coming next. I will personally visit every single great clan responsible for this humiliation. Multheric declared while pointing toward the distant skies furiously. And when I do, his voice deepened dangerously. I'll rip their worlds apart piece by piece until nothing remains except ash and screams. The surrounding dragons immediately shivered hearing those words. Because unlike ordinary threats, when Multheric spoke like this, everyone knew he genuinely meant every word. We are the new superpower of this universe. Multheric roared while violent flames exploded from his body uncontrollably. And I refuse to allow anyone to humiliate the dragons like this. His gaze shifted toward Kratos sharply afterward. Gather the Imperial army immediately. Every elite warrior, every fleet, every commander, Multheric ordered while murderous rage continued leaking endlessly from his body. This transgression will not go unpunished, he declared, as Kratos immediately lowered his head further. As you command, my lord. Kratos replied respectfully while the surrounding Dragon Court remained eerily silent. Because every dragon present already understood what was about to happen clearly. A new dragon offensive was about to begin, and this time, it was going to be led personally by Multheric himself. The New Age Alliance, Morris's paw. Inside the secured virtual chamber of the New Age Alliance, 4 gods gathered beneath an artificial night sky. As unlike ordinary virtual conferences, this place had been designed specifically to imitate the atmosphere of a real council hall. Morris sat lazily upon the stone throne of Granada while rain continued pouring endlessly behind him through the projection connected to his home world, whereas the other 3 gods joined from their respective territories. For several moments, none of them spoke. Then eventually, Morris smiled a wide unsettling smile, and began addressing the Alliance. Greetings, fellow Alliance members. I heard the delightful news regarding your recent counter-offensive. Honestly speaking, I must congratulate all 3 of you properly, because reclaiming 9 worlds from beneath the dragons in a single day is no small achievement whatsoever. I imagine your clans finally recovered at least a fragment of their lost pride. Morris said as the other gods exchanged glances quietly. And strangely enough, for what felt like the first time in years, faint smiles actually appeared across their faces. Truthfully, I didn't expect the campaign to succeed this smoothly either. Luhan admitted while nodding with his lips pursed. However, Clarence and Terrence assisting us directly changed the entire battlefield dynamic. Thanks to your support, Deceiver, it finally feels like we may actually survive this storm instead of simply waiting helplessly for extinction. Luhan said as Morris immediately burst into loud laughter hearing those words. Ha 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 ha. Oh, gentlemen, the game has only just begun, Morris declared while lightning flashed violently behind him through the endless storms of Granada. You can safely assume that Multheric is currently preparing to personally lead a retaliation campaign against one of you very soon. He explained as immediately, the expressions of the remaining gods turned serious once more. Because despite their recent success, none of them had forgotten what kind of monster Multheric truly was. So what exactly is the plan once he makes his move? Dutrask questioned while frowning deeply. If he attacks one of us personally, then what? Do the remaining three rally together around whichever clan becomes the target? Dutrask asked as Morris slowly shook his head in disappointment. No, you fool. That would be the worst possible response, Morris replied while tapping his fingers lightly against the armrest of his throne. Fighting Multheric directly is an enormous waste of time, because our advantage over the dragons has never been individual strength. Our advantage lies elsewhere entirely, he explained as the other gods gradually quieted down and allowed him to continue uninterrupted. You see, there are 4 of us. And only one of him, Morris continued while smiling faintly. Which means that if Multheric personally leads an army toward Mu Shen's territory tomorrow, then what naturally happens across the rest of the universe? His gaze slowly shifted between the 3 gods one by one. He leaves countless dragon worlds vulnerable. A dangerous calm lingered behind Morris's voice while he continued outlining his strategy further. So instead of wasting time attempting to stop him directly, I simply travel to planet Draconia myself and wipe it off the map. Meanwhile, Luhan attacks several frontier dragon territories elsewhere, and Dutrask strikes another region entirely. So, by the time Multheric realizes what's happening, half his empire begins collapsing behind him. Morris explained as slowly, understanding began surfacing within the eyes of the other gods. The dragons only appear invincible because Multheric himself is overwhelming. However, beyond him, their empire is incredibly fragile. Morris muttered while grinning wildly now. They don't possess multiple gods. They don't have a single demigod. And unlike the cult, they lack proper administrative depth entirely. Their empire survives solely because weaker civilizations fear Multheric personally. His smile widened gradually afterward. So the moment we prove that the dragon worlds themselves are vulnerable, everything changes. Lightning flashed violently behind him once more. We begin with Draconia. Once Multheric sees his own home world burning while he's busy elsewhere, he'll finally understand the reality of his position. Morris explained while the 3 gods quietly absorbed every word carefully. Because there's a reason why no single god has ever successfully ruled the entire universe alone. And that's because one man cannot exist everywhere at once. For several moments, silence filled the chamber afterward. Then eventually, Mu Shen frowned slightly. But what if he doesn't retreat even after finding out that his homeworld is burning? Mu Shen questioned carefully. What if instead of returning to defend his territories, he simply doubles down and continues attacking us regardless? He asked as Morris immediately shrugged casually. Then you run, Morris replied bluntly. You lose a world or 2 temporarily. Perhaps even several billion followers die. However, you survive to fight another day while the dragons steadily lose everything behind them. A cruel practicality lingered behind his words which he spoke without any hesitation or emotion. You must understand something important. Worlds can always be reconquered. Territories can always be reclaimed. Followers can reproduce. But dead gods do not return. Morris explained as slowly, the hesitation within the chamber began fading. Because logically speaking, his strategy did make sense. I believe Morris is correct here, Luhan added while glancing toward the remaining gods seriously. This victory was never going to come without sacrifices regardless. However, the dragons are stretched far too thin currently, and now we finally understand how to exploit that weakness properly. Luhan said as confidence gradually returned to his expression. We already tasted blood once with this monumental victory today. Now we continue pressing that advantage relentlessly until eventually, the dragons are forced back onto the defensive permanently. His gaze shifted toward Morris afterward. And in the meantime, you'll continue preparing a proper plan for dealing with Multheric himself, correct? Luhan questioned as Morris immediately laughed loudly once more. Of course, gentlemen. By the next time we gather here together, I'll have a strategy prepared regarding how to bring down that oversized lizard permanently, Morris declared while grinning madly, as hearing those words. For the first time in many years, the surviving great clan gods genuinely began believing that perhaps, just perhaps, the dragons could actually be defeated after all. A few days later, Planet Aqua Terrarium, Multhorax POV. A few days later, exactly as Morris predicted, a furious Multheric personally led a brutal counter-offensive against the Great Clan Worlds, as the Dragon King arrived before Planet Aqua Terrarium with overwhelming rage burning within his eyes. FSHHHH. A gigantic fourth-dimensional tunnel tore open across the skies above the mostly islandic oceanic world while hundreds of dragons poured out from within it endlessly, their massive bodies blotting out the heavens themselves. Then the slaughter began. Roar! Dragonfire rained down across entire islands while cities exploded beneath torrents of flame hot enough to melt steel and stone instantly, as panic spread throughout the planet while millions of civilians attempted fleeing toward underground shelters and emergency evacuation zones. Meanwhile, high above the skies, Multheric floated silently while overlooking the destruction unfolding beneath him with murderous fury visible across his face. You insignificant insects actually believed you could humiliate the dragons without consequences. Multheric muttered while his aura spread endlessly across the planet. And the moment it did, fizzed. Every electronic system throughout Aqua Terrarium immediately failed. Communication towers shut down. Anti-aircraft weapons lost power and precision guidance. Entire fleets plummeted from the skies powerless while dragonfire consumed them moments later. Naturally, the stationed Mu clan defenders still attempted resisting desperately. Thousands of warriors launched projectiles towards the dragons, while mana-powered artillery batteries unleashed massive energy bombardments toward the skies above. However, with Multheric personally leading the invasion himself, the battle's outcome had never truly been in doubt from the very beginning. Because against a god-ranked warrior, ordinary armies meant nothing. Boom! A single punch from Multheric shattered an entire island instantly while the shockwave alone created a tsunami powerful enough to destroy a dozen others. While below him, the dragons continued massacring everything in sight relentlessly, as within less than 30 minutes, Aqua Terrarium transformed into a burning nightmare. However, while Multheric unleashed destruction upon the Mu clan world personally, on the opposite side of the universe, another disaster quietly unfolded. Meanwhile, Planet Draconia. Inside the Dragon Court, entertainment continued normally despite Multhorac's absences. Drunken dragons laughed loudly beneath the crimson skies of Draconia, completely unaware that death itself had set its sights upon their home world. As suddenly, VWOOOM. Three oppressive auras descended upon the planet simultaneously. The atmosphere itself grew heavy. The skies darkened, and instinctive fear immediately spread throughout every dragon present within the capital. Step. Morris, Luhan, and Dutrask slowly descended directly into the Dragon Court, as their overwhelming divine pressure crushed the surrounding area mercilessly. Why you? One of the gods. No, 3 gods. But why here? The dragons muttered in fear, as they recognized the 3 figures standing before them instantly. Meanwhile, Morris simply smiled pleasantly. Yes, we are gods. And unlike your prehistoric lizard king, we're intelligent enough to understand strategy properly. Morris explained while glancing around the Dragon Court casually. Because while Multheric remains busy destroying our worlds elsewhere, we're going to destroy his in return. Morris said as panic immediately spread throughout the court. Destroy Draconia. Run. We must run. Are you stupid? You can't outrun a god. We must fight. The courtiers squabbled amongst one another, until one of them eventually stepped forward bravely. Lord Multheric will never allow you to get away with this. The dragon roared angrily. If you dare lay a hand upon Draconia, then once our king returns. The dragon began, however, before he could complete his sentence. Snap. Dutrask casually snapped his fingers, as BOOOOM. The dragon instantly exploded into countless pieces of flesh and blood. Silence followed immediately afterward. Blood splattered across nearby pillars while terrified dragons froze completely in place, as Morris slowly smiled wider. You know, he muttered while glancing around thoughtfully. There's honestly no point continuing this conversation anymore. Morris said as Luhan and Dutrask exchanged glances briefly before both gods immediately shot upward toward the skies above Draconia. And moments later, BOOOOOOOOM. Entire mountain ranges exploded. Volcanoes erupted violently. Dragon cities vanished beneath overwhelming divine attacks. Screams echoed endlessly throughout Draconia while hundreds of thousands of dragons died within moments. Meanwhile, inside the Dragon Court, Morris calmly walked between the remaining terrified dragons while studying them lazily. So which one of you should survive? Morris wondered aloud while the surrounding dragons trembled violently. I need somebody capable of telling a proper story afterward. His gaze slowly shifted toward one particularly fat dragon hiding behind a broken pillar. Oh, you look plump enough to survive. Morris muttered while smiling pleasantly. You'll do. Then casually. SHHHK. 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 Several tiny water bullets pierced through the heads of every remaining dragon within the court instantly. Blood sprayed across the palace walls while corpses collapsed everywhere. Only the fat dragon survived, as the terrified creature immediately fell onto its knees shaking uncontrollably. Mercy. It whimpered weakly. However, Morris ignored the plea entirely while opening another fourth-dimensional tunnel beside himself casually. Come along, Morris instructed while grabbing the dragon by its neck effortlessly. We have a message to deliver. Planet Aqua Terrarium, approximately 30 minutes later. Approximately 30 minutes later, while Aqua Terrarium continued burning beneath dragonfire, a fourth-dimensional portal suddenly tore open directly beside Multheric, as thud. A fat dragon crashed violently onto the ruined battlefield below. Multheric immediately frowned in confusion seeing one of his own kind suddenly appear here. My lord, the dragon screamed desperately while crawling toward Multheric through the rubble and ash. My lord, the great clan gods attacked Draconia. The dragon cried while terror filled every word leaving its mouth. They descended upon the capital personally. They're destroying our home world, my lord. For one brief moment, Multheric froze completely, then slowly. Understanding dawned upon him, and immediately afterward, pure rage exploded across his face. They dare. Multheric growled while his aura erupted outward violently. Boom. The skies above Aqua Terrarium shattered apart while countless dragons nearby collapsed beneath the pressure instantly. As without hesitation, Multheric immediately tore open a fourth-dimensional tunnel to return to Draconia. FSHHH. However, what he did not understand was that all this effort he was making was for naught. Because, by the time he was going to be back, Draconia would already be history. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.